a crime of honor committed by close relatives. A crime of honor is a severe criminal act, typically, but not necessarily, committed against a female family member as punishment for bringing disgrace and dishonor upon the family. The offenses punishable by death at the hands of relatives can vary across different countries and cultures, but often include marital infidelity and apostasy. Each year, according to official statistics, around 5,000 such crimes occur worldwide. However, various women's rights organizations claim this number is at least 4 times underreported. What is most alarming is that often, the perpetrators face no punishment, and their actions are deemed righteous. Police in countries where such crimes are prevalent simply turn a blind eye to these acts, and although it is claimed that in recent years the penalties for such actions have been intensified, there are no official data to substantiate this. Samia Shahid's case in 2016 shocked the world. She was forcibly married off to a cousin she openly despised and sent to her ancestral homeland. However, she soon broke off this imposed union to marry for love, against her relatives' wishes, and paid the ultimate price for it. Her story drew intense public scrutiny as she was a British citizen of Pakistani descent. Yet she met her tragic end in Pakistan, where the case was quickly suppressed, attempting to frame it as an unfortunate accident. The Shahid family story. Chaudhry Mohammed Shahid and Matiaz Shahid emigrated to the UK in the mid-1980s from a small Pakistani village named Pandori, located in the Jhelum district of Punjab province. They moved to a foreign land in search of a better life to escape the poverty they lived in back home. In November 1987, their eldest daughter Sami was born in the English city of Bradford, located in West Yorkshire, and a few years later, her younger sister Mita was born. The head of the family established his own business renting cars, which later focused on renting luxury vehicles, including high-end limousines. As his business prospered, he helped 2 of his brothers and their families also move from Pakistan and settle in the UK. The relatives also opened and successfully developed their businesses. One brother had his own seafood shop chain by the early 2000s, and the other opened a flower delivery and floristry company. Overall, the Shahid family was quite well known and successful in Bradford, being quite wealthy and influential. Sisters Sami and Mita were born and raised in the UK, but their family strictly adhered to the laws and traditions of their ancestral country, so the girls grew up under the influence of a mix of European and Pakistani cultures and customs. The liberal English views and manners starkly contrasted with the strict orders of their ancestors' country. For example, the girls were not allowed to drive a car, and all their contacts and movements were strictly monitored by their father. The elder daughter, Sami, was the apple of Chaudhry Muhammad's eye and was considered daddy's girl. He indulged her in every way, buying her expensive outfits and jewelry, and paid for her education at one of the most prestigious universities. She meticulously cared for her appearance, used cosmetics from well-known brands, visited beauty salons, and spent extravagant amounts of money there. Meanwhile, she worked part-time at a post office, essentially supported by her father who paid for all her whims and desires. Frequently, Sami, without her family knowing, would rent a car and drive herself. She loved driving, felt confident behind the wheel, and did not understand why Pakistani traditions forbade women from doing so. She was headstrong and freedom-loving, but she tried not to upset her parents, doing everything as they said. Shahid had many friends from school and university in England with whom she kept in touch. She was characterized as a bright, kind, and cheerful person. Forced marriage. Despite living a life filled with love and abundance and seemingly having everything she wanted, the woman was deprived of the opportunity to make any decisions independently. She constantly lived with an eye towards her parents' and elder family members' opinions, from whom she needed constant approval for her actions. More than anything, Sami feared upsetting her father, whom she adored. However, numerous prohibitions, fears, and strict orders meant she was never truly honest with her family. In 2012, her parents decided it was time for their eldest daughter to settle down, get married, start her own family, and have children. They insisted that she go to Pakistan and enter into a marriage in accordance with all the rules and cultural traditions. They chose her cousin, Chaudhry Muhammad Shakil, whom she barely knew, as her groom. It's worth noting that marriages between relatives and arranged marriages are quite common, although not a strict requirement in Sunni Islam, but the tradition is honored to this day. Sami knew that sooner or later her parents would choose a husband for her and present it as a fait accompli, leaving her with no choice in the matter. She was prepared for this, understanding the inevitability of such a marriage, but her father's choice was truly shocking to her. Shakil was openly distasteful to her, even causing her some repulsion. Additionally, he had recently been released from prison where he served time for ending someone's life over a land dispute. Since childhood, Sami occasionally interacted with Shakil as if he were a brother, but she could never imagine him as her spouse. Notably, her own parents were also cousins whose marriage was arranged by relatives, but they managed to genuinely fall in love and build a happy family. Her parents believed that their daughter would experience the same fate and that she and Chaudhry would eventually fall in love. Despite her aversion to the groom, Sami could not disobey her father and understood how important this was to her family. However, her mother and younger sister Mita later claimed that no one forced her into the marriage, and given her complex and headstrong character, it would have been impossible to do so physically or morally. She married voluntarily, without any coercion. In early February 2012, the decision about the upcoming wedding was finalized at a family council. The following couple of weeks, her parents and aunt and uncle, future in-laws, took the bride shopping, where she chose everything she liked, and they paid for expensive outfits, jewelry, accessories, cosmetics, and so on. Sami was denied nothing, but it all seemed as if she was being purchased. Likely that was indeed the case. The bride pretended to be caught up in the wedding preparations, but inwardly she felt like a hostage. She already understood that this marriage would not bring her happiness, but would be a real punishment. However, she could only discuss this with her friends, not her family. At home, she needed to appear happy, discuss the details of the upcoming celebration, and prepare for her departure to Pakistan. On February 20th, 2012, the young woman boarded a plane and while in the cabin, sent a message to a close friend saying she was flying thousands of miles to make the biggest mistake of her life, but she had no choice. Later, she sent several more messages in which she confessed that the mere sight of the groom made her nauseous, and she could not stand to be near him. On February 27th, a lavish wedding was held for Sami and Chaudhry in Pandori, attended by about 1,000 people. The celebration lasted 4 days, and as a wedding gift, her parents presented the newlyweds with their own luxurious 2-story house, located next to their family home in the same province of Pandori. However, the young woman understood that this rich and beautiful house would become a real prison for her, where she would be forced to live with a man she did not love. Return to the United Kingdom. Family life, predictably, did not bring Sami happiness. She still detested her now lawful husband and realized she could neither love this man nor even grow accustomed to him. But 4 months later, in mid-June 2012, the young woman returned to her native Bradford to sort out some issues and help her husband with the immigration documents for obtaining British citizenship. She was supposed to apply for a spousal visa for Shakil, but she was in no hurry with this, enjoying the illusion of freedom and the opportunity to not see her unloved husband for some time. When Sami finally started processing the documents, she learned that their wedding ceremony, conducted according to all the canons of Sharia, was just a marriage contract between Muslims, but had no legal force in the United Kingdom. To recognize such a marriage, certain measures under European laws were necessary, namely conducting a civil ceremony and obtaining an official document, a marriage certificate. Friends of Sami noticed changes in her character and behavior after returning from Pakistan. The young woman appeared sad, her eyes seemed extinguished. She was no longer the joyful and sociable person she used to be, and she clearly harbored deep resentment towards her parents. Any conversations or mentions of her husband and family life provoked irritation and anger in her. The issue was that Shackle was very jealous and tormented his wife, even from another country. He constantly called her and could demand at any time that she video chat with him. This was how the man controlled where his wife was, what she was doing, and who was with her. Moreover, this was, in a way, a demonstration of the husband's superiority and his power over the woman. In early August of the same year, during a phone conversation with a close friend, Sami confessed that her nerves were giving out. She was completely drained and no longer wanted to live because she had lost any joy, hope for happiness, and a bright future. She said she detested Chaudhry with all her soul and never wanted to see him again. However, she could not say this to her relatives. They only went around telling everyone about the luxurious wedding they had arranged for their eldest daughter. The very man. In early September, without having resolved the issues with the spousal visa, Sami was forced to return to Pakistan to her unloved husband. She regularly wrote to friends about how miserable she was, how much she hated her marriage, and how she felt trapped with no way out. This continued for several months, but then she began to complain less frequently, and her mood changed. During her next visit to the United Kingdom, it became clear what had caused this change. It turned out that she had met a young man online, Syed Mukhtar Kazim, who, like her, was a British citizen of Pakistani origin. He was born and raised in London but had been working and living in the United Arab Emirates for the last few years. The pair started corresponding and quickly developed romantic feelings. They secretly arranged a meeting, and in October 2013, they saw each other in person for the first time. Sami immediately realized that Syed was the man of her dreams, with whom she wanted to spend the rest of her life. He was kind, caring, attentive, and courted her beautifully. They had a lot in common, but they both understood how dangerous and risky their relationship was. Nevertheless, life only seemed meaningful to the young people when they were together. She openly told her beloved about the situation she was in and said she was ready to end her marriage to start anew with Syed. However, she could not get a divorce through a British court because, according to local law, she was not married at all. Divorce and new marriage. In the spring of 2014, Shahid decided to speak with Shakil and asked him for a divorce, but he rudely refused, stating that she would belong to him until the end of her days. Then, during another visit to the United Kingdom to her parents, she secretly contacted a local Islamic Sharia council, reporting that she had been forced into marriage, which was a valid basis for annulling the marriage. She also converted from Sunni to the Shiite branch of Islam, which her new lover belonged to. The cleric contacted the woman's husband to hear his side regarding their marriage, but he again rudely refused to discuss his personal life, stating that he would not give permission for a divorce. After that, the Islamic Sharia Council of the United Kingdom dissolved the marriage, recognizing that Shahid had been coerced into it by family pressure. Sami's family members had no idea that she had divorced her husband in absentia and was preparing to remarry, now to the man she loved. In September 2014, the young woman secretly married her new chosen one. This time, the union had legal force, and the spouses received a certificate of registration of their relationship, confirming its legality. The same cleric who had granted permission to dissolve the bride's previous marriage conducted the nikah religious ceremony. Only a few close friends of the newlyweds, who were present at their wedding, knew about this event. The couple was truly happy. Sami confessed to her friends that she felt like a princess in a fairy tale and couldn't believe that all this was happening in reality. However, this joyous and happy event was the beginning of a real nightmare: family dispute and escape from the country. When Shakil demanded that his wife return to Pakistan, she responded that she no longer belonged to him and presented a certificate of her new marriage. This infuriated the man, who immediately called his father-in-law to inform him of the situation, sparking a severe scandal. The family attempted to coerce her to return to her husband with threats, but she refused, which soon led to severe consequences. A few weeks later, Sami was brutally assaulted on the street while shopping with her sister. Notably, her sister was unharmed, but Sami nearly had her legs broken with metal bars. The police took her statement but failed to find the men responsible for the assault, and the case was quickly dismissed. At this time, Syed had to fly to Dubai for work, leaving his wife in the United Kingdom awaiting a visa to follow him. The wait became a real torment for her, filled with endless threats, disputes with relatives, and fear for her life. Moreover, her parents tried to prove that their daughter's divorce from Shakil was invalid, and even caused a scene with the cleric who had married the lovers. Sami's mother was furious, insulting her daughter and saying that she had disgraced their family and would suffer terrible retribution. In the spring of 2015, Sami finally received her visa and was able to fly to her husband in Dubai. It felt more like an escape, as the young woman feared her family would do everything possible to keep her and forcibly return her to Pakistan. For several months, she kept her passport with friends who also bought her a plane ticket and accompanied her to the airport. A new life. The following year was the happiest in Sami's life. She enjoyed her freedom and the ability to make her own decisions, living with the man she loved, who adored her and was ready to carry her on his hands. Additionally, she could drive a car, something her parents and former husband would never have allowed her to do. In photos posted on social media, Sami was radiantly happy. She blossomed, looked more beautiful, and it was clear she had achieved what she had always dreamed of. Shahid wanted to become a mother as soon as possible, but sadly, this happiness was not meant to be for her. Nonetheless, she and her husband confidently looked to the future, making plans for their lives, unaware that her closest relatives had already condemned her. Immediately after their daughter's departure, her parents filed a missing persons report with the police, which they later wanted to reclassify as an abduction, accusing Kazim of the crime. The Shahid family members started devising a plan to force the young woman to return by any means necessary, considering various options. Threats no longer worked on her, but they could play on her sympathy. A sinister trap. In June 2016, Sami's parents conveyed tragic news. Her aunt, Shakil's mother, had passed away. Sami was devastated and even considered flying to Pakistan for the funeral, but she was aware of the risks involved. Many family members still hadn't accepted that she had left her unloved husband and remarried. Her actions were viewed as betrayal and disgrace. A week after the aunt's funeral, her mother called again, reporting that her father's health had severely deteriorated. He had diabetes, and his condition had recently become unstable. If he passed away, Sami knew she would never forgive herself if she didn't visit him. Despite her concerns and her husband's attempts to dissuade her, she decided to travel to Pandori. Fearing for her life and safety, she promised her husband to keep in constant contact with him. On July 14, 2016, Shahid arrived in Pakistan and first went to a close friend's house. She left her passport and return ticket to Dubai with her friend, shared her fears, noted her bad premonition, and asked her friend to pray for her safe return to Syed. The following few days passed relatively peacefully. She stayed in touch with her husband and friend, updating them on her movements. She visited her aunt's grave with her family and met with many relatives. She was scheduled to fly back to Dubai on July 21st. However, on July 20th, Sami suddenly stopped making contact. Tragic news. On July 20th, 2016, Chaudhry Mohammed Shahid called the police station to report the tragic death of his daughter. When law enforcement arrived at the house where Sami had lived with her first husband, they found her lifeless body at the bottom of the stairs. Unfortunately, it was too late to help her. There were several visible bruises on her body, which, according to her parents, she sustained from falling down the stairs, and a small amount of pinkish foam was found coming out of her mouth. According to her father, Sami likely had a heart problem, fell, and rolled down the stairs. Since no one was home at the time, she was not assisted promptly and she passed away. When asked about the whereabouts of the deceased's husband, Chaudhry stated that he had gone out on business. The police found no signs of foul play at the scene and did not open a criminal case, leaving the final determination to the forensic experts. An autopsy was conducted on the same day, yet the pathologist found no signs of violence, and the conclusion was that her death was due to natural causes. She was buried within a few hours of her death. Sami's sudden demise was not considered suspicious and raised no questions, except from her grieving husband. When Kazim was informed of his wife's sudden death from a heart attack, he couldn't believe it. Moreover, the press called the young woman's death a voluntary departure from life due to depression over her inability to have children. However, this version was contested by Shahid's relatives, who claimed she lost consciousness on the stairs and broke her neck while falling. Investigation and the grim truth. Syed Mukhtar flew to Pandori on the first available flight and went straight to the police station to report that his wife was deprived of her life by her relatives and former husband. He described the forced marriage and her escape, as well as threats from her family. This information fundamentally changed the case. The authorities recognized it as an honor crime, but the body had already been buried, and the official report stated that Shahid died of natural causes. However, as the deceased was a British citizen, Kazim sought to involve European law enforcement and the media in the investigation. Initially, Sami's father agreed to an interview and tried to portray Syed Mukhtar as an imposter and extortionist. However, after the young man produced their marriage certificate, as well as a hard-won copy of the medical report and post-mortem photos of the deceased, an investigation was initiated. The report noted bruises on the deceased's neck and legs and traces of male seminal fluid on her body, indicating that she had intimate relations shortly before her demise. But with whom, if Shakil was supposedly not at home that day? Kazim held a press conference, presenting all the evidence he had, including text, voice, and video messages from Sami, in which she repeatedly expressed fear for her life. Suspicions arose that the police had been bribed, and the deceased's father and former husband were immediately detained. It turned out they had no intention of letting the young woman return to Dubai. They forcibly brought her to the house given as a wedding gift, where they searched all her belongings for the passport and ticket, which, as mentioned, she had left with a friend. A furious Shakil, with his father-in-law's tacit approval, physically subdued the young woman, and after she tried to escape, the men caught up with her on the stairs. While the former husband strangled Sami with her scarf, the father held her legs, leaving her no chance of survival. This account was confessed at the station by the perpetrator himself, although Chaudhry Muhammad denied any involvement in the act against his own daughter. Legal proceedings and the fate of the participants. Besides the father and former husband, the deceased's uncle, who had acquired a forged report before the autopsy, and the commissioner who conducted the initial investigation, were also detained. In court, Shakil recanted his confession, claiming it was made under duress. He spent just over 2 years behind bars but was released on bail in September 2018. In 2019, the man remarried and again attempted to relocate to the United Kingdom, which was unsuccessful. The father of the deceased was in prison from July to December 2016 and was also released on bail. He passed away in January 2018 at the age of 52 due to exacerbated health problems, never admitting guilt or involvement in his daughter's demise. The deceased's uncle and the commissioner were also released in the fall of 2016 without facing any consequences. Soon after, arrest warrants were issued in Pakistan for Mita and Matiyaz Shahid, but the mother and sister of the deceased promptly returned to Bradford. Mita later gave a substantial interview in which she attempted to discredit Sami and her second husband, blaming them for the downfall of the once happy Shahid family. "Wake up. Is anyone alive in this house?" Judy cheerfully entered the home of her sister, Linda Slayton. The morning of September 4th was normal, but something seemed off. Judy often visited her nephews, and today she came to their home as usual. A cup of hot coffee and a friendly conversation with her sister was how their day usually began. "Where are you, little slackers?" Judy smiled, peering into the room of her nephews, who were sleepily rubbing their eyes. She was surprised to see Linda still asleep, for she usually woke up before the boys left for school. Judy left the house and noticed that the window in her sister's room was wide open and one of the curtains was missing. It was strange. "Why aren't you in school yet? Is your mom sick? Why is she still sleeping?" Judy walked restlessly toward her sister's bedroom. "Linda Slayton, I want to see you." Judy knocked on the door, but there was no answer. The next instant, the sight that came into view made her heart sink. Her sister's body lay across the bed, her head hanging to the floor. The young woman was half undressed, and a wire hanger was wrapped around her neck. There was no sign of a struggle in the room. The closet was open, but otherwise, everything looked normal, Linda's things lying in their places. Upon seeing her sister's body, Judy screamed, and the janitor working outside called the police. The police arrived and asked the children to leave the house, which had now become a crime scene. Jeff was able to walk past his mother's room without looking at her body. Tim, on the other hand, looked into the room and saw his mother dead. The boys were sent to their grandparents' house for the duration of the investigation. That fateful morning was the beginning of a mysterious and dark story. It changed their lives forever. Linda Slayton was born on a spring day, March 8, 1950. The girl dreamed of a large and happy family. Her fate, however, did not turn out the way she wanted. At the age of 19, Linda entered into marriage with Frank Slayton. At this age, she was already a mother. 3 years before the wedding, the couple had their first son, Jeffrey, and after another year, a younger son, Timothy, was born. And only after another year, Linda managed to convince the father of their children, Frank, to become a family. But, alas, this marriage turned out to be far from her expectations. Frank, after becoming a husband and father, disappointed his family. He turned out to be a cruel man. His outbursts of anger regularly fell on his wife and sons. Jeff and Tim's memories of their childhood were filled with nightmares. Their father was an aggressive alcoholic who kept his family in suspense. Linda often thought about divorce, but fear and addiction prevented her from taking that step. However, in 1974, after 9 long years of marriage, she gathered the last vestiges of strength and determination. Leaving behind the hell that was their family, Linda took her sons and left Frank Slayton. It was the first step towards a new life where Linda hoped she could give her sons the security and happiness they had been denied for so long. She didn't yet know the trials that lay ahead, including that terrible day that became fateful for her family. After the divorce, Linda and her 2 children lived at 303 North Brunel Parkway in Lakeland, Florida, which was one of Polk County's densely populated cities. In 1981, it was a place where business was booming, and new residential neighborhoods were being built on every corner. These were mostly duplexes where large families settled. Lakeland, with its abundance of lawns and greenery, was very attractive to residents. One of the many duplex homes belonged to the Slayton family. Despite this, they didn't stay in it for long. It is known that Linda and her sons moved to Florida from Hartselle, Alabama, just 2 weeks before the horrific crime. What could have led to such a gruesome tragedy? Perhaps Linda brought not only her children with her, but also dark issues from her past. After her divorce, Linda Slayton began a new life as a single mom. She strived to give her children everything she could, torn between work and home responsibilities. Linda didn't have a car, so her sons either walked to school or neighbors drove them. Despite the hardships, Linda never gave up and tried to provide her children with everything they needed. In addition to school activities, the boys also participated in the soccer section. But since it was not always easy to get there without a car, Coach Joe became their savior. He regularly drove the brothers from home to the stadium and back. A week before the tragic events on September 4th, Linda was actively preparing for her mother's move. She was sure that a woman living with them would be able to help Linda cope with the daily household chores and create an atmosphere of comfort and family harmony in the house. On the evening of September 3rd, Jeff returned home from a workout. He felt an empty feeling in his stomach, but there was no food in the house, so he decided to go to his grandmother's house. When he returned around 9:30 p.m., his brother and mother were not in the house. The boy turned on the TV in an attempt to distract himself, but his anxious thoughts did not leave him. The quarrel with his mother, which had occurred the day before, did not give him peace. He tried to put it out of his mind, but when he came home and did not find his relatives, he began to feel a strange longing. Usually at this time, their house was in a state of excitement. Linda's mother was cooking dinner in the kitchen, the smell of delicious food filling the house, and her younger brother Tim was merrily hanging around, sometimes running up to Jeff, hoping for a conversation. But sensing his brother's displeasure, he ran back to his mother. These moments were repeated several times until everyone was gathered around the table for dinner. Around 11:30 p.m., the noise and laughter of family members in the hallway interrupted Jeff's musings. His heart began to beat more calmly. His mother and brother came home, and Jeff finally went back to watching the movie that was coming to an end. At dinner, Linda talked about going to spend the evening with the neighbors and playing cards, but before that, she decided to do some housework. When his younger brother Tim went to bed, Jeff stayed and helped his mom wash the dishes. Before going to bed, he decided to stop by her room to apologize for the fight that happened between them earlier. Jeff remembers that his last words were, "I love you, Mom. I'll see you tomorrow." If only he had known that those words would be the last words he was able to say to his mother. September 4th, 1981 was a tragic day in the lives of two brothers, 12-year-old Tim and 15-year-old Jeff. It was then, on that terrible day, that they found their mother, Linda Slayton, dead in her bed. At the time, Linda was only 31 years old. Who could have committed such horrific cruelty against the mother of two defenseless children? Was it someone they knew, or was Linda the victim of a random attack? After Jeff and Tim left for their grandmother's house, Sergeant Edgar Pickett of the Lakeland Police Department arrived on the scene. He was the first detective to begin investigating this terrible tragedy. As soon as he arrived, police officers, reporters, and ambulances streamed to the house. The place was cordoned off. Yellow tape reading, "Crime scene, no trespassing," was stretched around the house. Sergeant Pickett was the first to uncover the most important piece of evidence in the case. On a window where the curtain was missing, he discovered a palm print that did not belong to the murdered Linda. This footprint could have been an important DNA sample, but at the time DNA testing was not yet widespread. To find out the exact cause of Linda's death, her body was sent for an autopsy. It revealed bruises on her shoulders, arms, and neck. The fact that she was half naked indicated a possible rape. After a detailed autopsy, it became clear that Linda had first been severely beaten, then abused, and then strangled with a hanger from her own closet. This horrific scenario became the starting point of the investigation, but there were still many questions. To solve the mystery of Linda Slayton's murder, the police decided to go through the genealogical tree of the Slayton family. The first suspect turned out to be Linda's ex-husband, Frank Slayton. Information about him indicated that he was a violent and aggressive man who often abused his wife and children and showed no concern for the family. Quite expectedly, Frank immediately came under the suspicion of the police. He was detained for questioning, but it soon became clear that he was in Alabama on the night of the murder. Nevertheless, the police did not rule him out as a suspect. The second suspect was Linda's eldest son, Jeff. On the day before the murder, he and his mother had a serious argument. According to witnesses, the relationship between Linda and her son had been strained recently. Jeff, as the eldest child in the family, had experienced the full brunt of living with an abusive father and then with his mother, who was raising his brothers alone. Their frequent conflicts were in plain sight, but Jeff always tried to smooth over quarrels and make peace with his mother, just as he did the night before Linda's murder. The police conducted 2 polygraph tests for Jeff, and both times the results were negative, thus eliminating him from the list of suspects. Third on the suspect list was Linda's boyfriend, whose name has not been released. This white man was a close friend of Linda's and often socialized with her children, but polygraph testing revealed nothing suspicious, and police were forced to clear him of suspicion. After Linda's funeral, the family gradually began to get the brothers' lives back to normal. The boys went back to school and tried to suppress in their minds the horrible event that had occurred at 303 North Brunel Parkway. Tim continued to attend soccer practice, and he always felt support from his team and coaches. Coach Joe stayed true to his promise and continued to give Tim rides home after practice. A month after the tragedy, Tim put a picture of the team and coach by his bed. Weeks turned to weeks, months turned to years, but the case of Linda's murder remained unsolved. The Slayton brothers had to accept the hard reality of their new life. Their mother had been murdered, and only their grandparents, Clarence and Margaret Harris, were left with them to support them through this difficult time. It had been a full 17 years since the horrific murder of Linda Slayton. The years have passed, and the boys who lost their mother have grown into grown men full of love and care for their own families. Both brothers started families, and Jeff had 2 children. However, he never forgot that last night. "I didn't hear anything at all. Even the neighbors claim they didn't hear anything suspicious that night. It weighs heavily on me," he often repeated in conversation with his loved ones. Sometimes, sitting in front of the television waiting for dinner, while his wife fussed in the kitchen and his children ran around him, Jeff would catch a glimpse of the past. At such moments, he was taken back to his childhood home, to the last evening with his mother. The unsettling feelings that had gripped him that last evening seemed to foretell a horror that would change his life forever. The voices of his children and wife, each time as a rescue, brought Jeff back to reality. Despite the successful lives the brothers have built, they have never stopped following the investigation and have worked hard to keep the case alive. They regularly return to Lakeland to see if there was any news in their mother's case. In an interview, Tim said, "No matter how many investigators are replaced, we always remind them that we are waiting to find whoever killed our mom. The burden is on us, and I can't let it go." In 2001, detectives finally had a new thread that could lead to the solution of this long-standing mystery. In the same neighborhood where Linda was murdered, police arrested a man named Jimmy Ulmer, who had similar mannerisms to Linda's killer. He was charged with the attempted murder of a little girl he had tried to pull through the window of her room. The police began to scrutinize his connections and alibis and discovered that he was now already sentenced to 80 years in prison for other crimes. For the police, he became the prime suspect. However, a small problem arose. By that time, Jimmy had already passed away, and it was impossible to conduct DNA testing. However, Jimmy's mother agreed to provide a sample of her DNA. Unfortunately, the results did not match the sample found at Linda's murder scene. The investigation again went unanswered. In 1998, the investigator who had been looking into Linda Slayton's murder, Edgar Pickett, resigned and was replaced by a new detective, Brad Grace. Grace discovered an unidentified DNA sample that had been collected at the crime scene back in 1981. He decided to send that sample to the state's largest laboratory, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, to try to identify Linda's killer from the DNA. By 1999, the department already had the means to conduct such tests, and Detective Grace sprang into action. He reviewed the list of suspects and decided to collect DNA samples from each of them. In 2001, he was confident that he could find the perpetrator through his DNA. He first contacted the Slayton brothers and asked them to submit DNA samples for comparison with samples found at the crime scene. The results of the analysis completely ruled the brothers out as suspects. Detective Grace then contacted Linda's ex-husband, Frank Slayton. Frank, after Linda's death, had reevaluated his life and was living a good life. Frank voluntarily gave up his DNA samples. Again, no matches were found. In 2005, Grace submitted DNA samples from the unknown perpetrator to the FBI to be tested against the data in the federal database. These comparisons were made regularly, but were inconclusive. Eventually, 17 years after Linda Slayton's murder, Detective Grace retired and was replaced by Detectives Tammy Hathcock and Russell Hurley. After 3 more years of investigation, Tammy Hathcock learned of a new DNA recognition technology developed at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. She sent a DNA sample from the crime scene to expert Cecile Moore. Using a genealogical database and other documents, Cecile Moore compiled a family tree that led to the person suspected of killing Linda Slayton. This moment proved to be a turning point in the investigation and a shocking one for the Slayton brothers. The face of the killer was in one of the photographs in Tim's bedroom. That man turned out to be Joseph Clinton Mills, also known as Coach Joe. Police began investigating Mills' background and found that he had been charged with grand larceny and forging a will, but was not convicted of it. His fingerprints and palm prints were kept in police databases. To establish Joseph Mills's guilt, police had to match his DNA to that found at the scene of Linda Slayton's murder. Detectives decided to obtain a sample of Mills's DNA without his knowledge. The veracity of this information is unknown, but this is the version that is included in the case. Police collected trash from a dumpster at Mills's house and found a Band-Aid with traces of blood on it. This patch was sent for examination. At this time, detectives were investigating the suspect's background. Joseph Mills had spent most of his life in the town of Kettleman, which is only 30 minutes from the crime scene. He had a family, children, and grandchildren. 2 weeks later, the lab's response came back. The DNA from Linda Slayton's murder scene matched Joseph Mills' DNA. This result became a key piece of evidence in the case, and Joseph Mills was arrested and charged with the murder of Linda Slayton. In December 2019, Joseph Mills was arrested and taken to police for questioning. He was only 20 years old at the time of Linda Slayton's murder in 1981. Detectives conducted an interview with Mills at the time, but it was done over the phone, and he did not become a suspect in the murder. Now, after years of investigation, it was impossible for Mills to deny his involvement in the crime. According to his testimony, on the night of the murder, he had come to Linda's home with her consent for sexual relations. But detectives doubted his version. They speculated that Mills had been watching Linda for some time because he regularly drove her children to practice. According to investigators' version, after the coach brought the boy home from practice, he waited until the house was empty before sneaking into Linda's room through a window. Hiding in a closet, he waited until she was alone in the room. He then came out of hiding, beat and abused Linda, and strangled her with a wire hanger from her own closet. At trial, Joseph Mills was found guilty of first-degree murder and rape. The investigation and trial finally brought long-awaited justice to this horrific crime that had gone unsolved for years. The sons of the murdered woman were still left in shock and could not understand what motivated Joseph to kill their mother. The court hearing was tense. Linda Slayton's children, Tim and Jeff, sat on a spectator bench defending the memory of their mother. At the center of attention was Joseph Clinton Mills, Coach Joe. This man, who once seemed like a role model, sat in an accusatory cage. His gaze was cold and indifferent, as if nothing had happened. Tim Slayton, the oldest of the brothers, looked at the man he had once revered and now saw in him the face of evil. The fire of indignation burned in Tim's eyes, and he jumped to his feet, turning to Joseph. "Why? I just want to understand why, Joe. Why did you kill our mom? Why did you take her away from us? We were so happy." Mills only mumbled back, "I'm a good man." The Slayton family never received an apology or remorse from him. Probably even the killer himself had a hard time explaining his actions. This came as a shock to Tim, because as a child he had considered Coach Joe a role model. Now he is left with only questions and painful memories. Joseph Mills was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As if a heavy stone had fallen from the Slayton brothers' shoulders, their mother was finally avenged. And while the brothers console themselves with the thought that the killer will spend the rest of his days in prison, they are still furious at the fact that Joseph Mills enjoyed freedom for nearly 40 years while they lost their mother. Linda Slayton's story, her tragic death, and years of investigation have left an incredible mark on her sons. Tim and Jeff Slayton, two brothers who not only witnessed this tragedy, but also became first-hand participants in the investigation, share their experiences and feelings. "He kept asking us how the case was going," says Tim, the older of the brothers. "He didn't ask specific questions. He just wanted to know if there was any news on the case, if there was any new evidence, and I just told him that nothing had changed." Tim still can't believe that his mother's killer was a man he considered a friend and respected. The picture of him standing behind Joseph Mills has always reminded him that life goes on, but without his mom. Jeff, the younger brother, always thinks about how his life would have turned out if Mom had been alive. This tragedy has left an unbearable void in his heart that nothing can fill. Despite all the hardship and suffering, the Slayton brothers try to live a full life for their mother, Linda Slayton. They visit her grave regularly, placing fresh flowers and praying that she knows they will never forget her and will continue to fight for justice. Linda Slayton's story is one of fortitude, of incredible endurance, and of the fact that even after the most horrific losses, the love and memory of loved ones lives on in the hearts of those left behind. The Beverly Liot case, madness by inheritance, when a favorite son becomes an executioner. Genetics, unfortunately, is inextricably linked to many diseases that are inherited. These include some mental disorders. However, even an existing predisposition is only a risk in probability, but not a guarantee that the child will inherit this or that ailment. Naturally, every parent hopes that the children will take from him only the best, and diseases will bypass offspring. Many experts say that there are no specific genes for the transmission of mental illness. That is, no one gene is necessary or sufficient to provoke the disease. Nevertheless, mental illness tends to run in families. This is exactly the problem faced by our heroine today, Beverly Liot, who sincerely believed that her children would not be affected by such an affliction. And indeed, Beverly's daughter grew up a perfectly healthy and balanced woman, but the son, apparently, took a double blow in which he blamed solely on his mother. It should be noted that the presence of a mental disorder did not affect the intelligence of this guy. On the contrary, he was very clever and calculating, from which the atrocities committed by him look even more sickeningly creepy. Who is Beverly Liot? Beverly Liot was born on the 1st of October 1956 in the capital of Colorado, a picturesque metropolis called Denver. She was raised with her older brother Stephen and sister Martha in an ordinary family of Barbara and Edwin Liot, who lived all their lives in their hometown, almost never leaving its boundaries. After graduating from high school, Beverly went to a local college, but here she could not go to university for a variety of reasons, partly related to her health. In her youth, the girl worked as a salesman, but after she married at the age of 26 and gave birth to 2 children, she devoted herself to her family for many years and was exclusively engaged in raising heirs and creating a home. In 1988, Beverly had a long-awaited firstborn son, Ari, and a few years later, a daughter, Libby, was born. The young woman literally did not care about her heirs and lived for them. However, in the second half of the 90s, her marriage broke up. The husband left the family, moved to another state, and was no longer interested in the fate of his ex-wife and did not take any part in the lives of children. Beverly was forced to take 2 jobs at once, but thanks to her diligence and determination, the family of 3 did not need anything. She and her children moved to the suburbs of Denver, a small and relatively young, founded in 2001 town centennial, where they rented a cozy, spacious house. In the mid-2000s, Beverly, on one of the dating sites, met a man named Seth Missy, with whom they had a correspondence, which grew into a romantic relationship. It was he who inspired her lover to finally fulfill her dream and pursue higher education. Liot chose medical school because she always dreamed of helping other people and felt that in this lies her calling. At that time, she was already over 50 years old, and in the group she was twice as old as her fellow students. However, she easily found a common language with them and is remembered by all as sociable, attentive, and responsible miniature brunette, who was nicknamed Caring Angel. Beverly and Seth's romance lasted about 5 years before the couple decided to officially legalize their relationship. For both of them, the step was a serious one, but they were ready for it. Beverly was happy, as she finally had a college degree, had a better paying job, and was about to marry the man she loved. Her children were old enough by then to be on their own, but her son Ari was a source of genuine anxiety and apprehension, and there were a number of good reasons for that. A hereditary disease. There was a sensitive issue in the Liot family that they tried hard to hide from others and never discussed with outsiders. The fact that Beverly and her sister Martha from an early age suffered from bipolar affective disorder, which is characterized by frequent changes in mood phases, from manic to depressive. From time to time, the disorder was exacerbated. But if Martha experienced minor discomfort associated with this disorder, and the prescribed medication quickly gave positive results, Beverly sometimes needed hospital treatment, because she was on the verge of voluntarily taking her own life. It was for this reason that she was unable to go to university in her time, and for the same reason the marriage with the father of her children broke up. It is also worth noting that her mother, Barbara too, was subject to prolonged depression, but she faced this problem in the 40s, and then the woman no one in time did not provide qualified help, and so she was forced to fight her illness on her own for almost all her life. Beverly was sure that the mental disorder in their family is transmitted exclusively through the female line, because the disease manifested itself in her mother, her and her sister, while her brother Stephen remained completely normal. In this regard, Beverly feared for the health of her daughter Libby, but just the daughter of the disease bypassed, hitting with redoubled force on Ari, the special child. From early childhood, Ari was a rather strange, withdrawn boy prone to tantrums. At the age of 5, he was diagnosed with autism, and later a whole host of other mental disorders and abnormalities were added. He could withdraw into himself, and completely abstracted from what was going on around him. But such states, as a rule, alternated with attacks of aggression. Despite his mental problems, Ari went to a normal high school, where he studied quite well. Particularly easy to give him the exact sciences. In particular, he was fond of chemistry and physics. The boy easily solved complex problems, and most calculations were made in his mind. His intelligence was above average, but his social and communication skills were practically absent. Classmates avoided the strange and unsociable peer, or simply mocked him. Ari had no friends at all, was not eager to learn about the world around him, was aggressive and violent, which manifested itself in cruelty to animals and attacks on other children. The boy was repeatedly hospitalized and prescribed medication to correct his condition, but at home he usually stopped taking the prescribed medication and soon returned to his previous state. His parents tried to control him to take the necessary pills, but the older he got, the more difficult it was to do so. He did not know how to ask or talk calmly, and he always got what he wanted with tantrums. The boy could shut himself in and not talk to anyone for weeks, but could talk for hours to himself or to some imaginary interlocutor. In periods of aggravation, he became dangerous to others, and his relatives sometimes insisted on his compulsory hospitalization. A dangerous teenager. As a teenager, Ari learned that his mother, aunt, and grandmother also suffered from mental health problems, and his mother had to be hospitalized at times. During that period, Ari literally hated his mother and blamed her for all of his troubles. He believed that she had awarded him with a disease that was ruining his life. The young man became increasingly uncontrollable. He threatened his loved ones with violence and constantly wondered why his own sister, family curse, bypassed. Being with him under the same roof was becoming unsafe, and the first could not stand the head of the family. He filed for divorce and literally escaped. Despite his diagnosis, Ari was easily able to enter the university, receiving a high passing score. However, the guy was expelled in his first year after he brought a homemade firearm to the institution and threatened a fellow student with death. At that time, he was arrested for the first time, but only got off with an educational talk, confiscation of the weapon, and expulsion from the university. About a year later, the police were contacted by Beverly and asked to come to their home immediately to subdue her son, who was threatening to kill her and her daughter, and appeared to be very serious. But the police handed the violent young man into the hands of psychiatrists, and those, after a short treatment in the hospital, released him home, prescribing medication, which Ari, of course, did not take. Hateful stepfather. Ari was 18 years old when Beverly met Seth and began dating him. Soon the couple decided to live together, but Ari, from the very beginning, took his mother's new chosen one in the bayonet. He tried in every possible way to get him out of the house, threatened, scandalized, and even started fights. The appearance of another man in the house young man perceived as a personal insult and betrayal by his mother. Seth, as best he could, tried to support his beloved. He looked for specialists who could help the young man, paid for his treatment in clinics, but the more he tried, the more Ari hated him. The very thought of this man becoming his stepfather and part of their family frightened and depressed Ari, making him aggressive and dangerous. Seth Missy repeatedly told his wife that her son was old enough to live on his own. He could study or work, and be like everyone else if he took his medication properly. Beverly Liot herself was well aware of this, but she loved her son and could not leave him or kick him out, so she continued to endanger her own life. Obsession with guns. As time went on, the young man's hobbies became more and more bizarre, sophisticated, and dangerous. He had a weakness for weapons, and to be more precise, was literally obsessed with them. In the basement of his own house, he collected homemade firearms literally from improvised materials, as they say, on his knees, which once again proved that the guy was very smart, clever, and enterprising. But Ari was not limited to one weapon and got the idea to create an explosive device. He found all the information he was interested in on the internet, bought or ordered the components he needed, and the substances he couldn't get. He decided to synthesize at home himself, using his deep knowledge of chemistry. The mother found her son in the backyard of the house. Beverly was suspicious, and since her son did not answer questions and behaved strangely, she immediately called the police. As it turned out, she did it in time because during the search, the police found in the house almost ready bomb. In addition, they found and confiscated a modified rifle, several pistols assembled from parts of different models, a silencer, and a lot of spare parts for weapons. When Ari's computer search history for the past few months was reviewed and studied, the FBI became seriously interested in the young man, as they suspected that he was preparing a large-scale crime. In addition, in Ari's room on the shelves were numerous jars of poisonous substances, including arsenic and potassium cyanide. He himself could not clearly explain why he had purchased them. The young man was arrested the same day, but was only charged with a misdemeanor possession of weapons and careless handling of dangerous chemicals that could cause death or serious injury. But Ari pleaded guilty, cooperated with the investigation, and received only a 1-year suspended sentence, after which he returned to his home, where he again began to terrorize his mother, sister, and Seth. The threat of reprisals and the indifference of the medical profession. After his arrest and suspended sentence, Ari literally went mad with anger and hatred. Not a day went by that he didn't threaten to kill his family in their sleep or burn down their house after locking everyone in there. Then Ari was hospitalized again and spent about 3 months in the walls of a psychiatric hospital. Doctors, in addition to earlier diagnoses, revealed signs of schizophrenia and acute psychosis in the young man. After another course of treatment, the young man became quiet for a while and went into himself again. He did not talk to anyone, spent most of his time in his room at his computer, and seemed to take his prescribed medication faithfully. But only a month later, he had another breakdown, which was triggered by the news of his mother and Seth's upcoming wedding. Ari also overheard Ari talking about his mother and stepfather, planning to buy their own house in another state, move there, and start their lives over. Libby's sister had already moved out with her boyfriend, which meant Ari would be on his own. The 25-year-old guy was not happy about it. The young man literally went crazy. He threw his mother a tantrum, screamed, waved a knife in front of her, threatened to kill her and make sure that the body would never be found. Beverly immediately called the psychiatric hospital, told them everything, and asked for her son to be forcibly hospitalized again. But the attending physician was dismissive of her request, believing that there was no reason to do so, and that the last course of treatment had yielded positive results, so that Ari, in his opinion, did not pose a threat to others. That same evening, Beverly had one last conversation with Seth, who was in another city for work, and was unable to come to her immediately. Beverly's mysterious disappearance. On the 14th of October 2012, less than 2 weeks after the woman celebrated her 56th birthday, she mysteriously disappeared. She failed to turn up for hospital duty that day, something that had never happened before. Colleagues were the first to sound the alarm. After failing to call his lover and receiving no response to his numerous messages, Seth dialed Libby's number to find out when she had last spoken to her mother. As it turned out, Libby had also been trying to call her unsuccessfully since morning. Seth called the house phone, and what he heard horrified him. The phone was picked up by Ari, who unsuccessfully tried to copy his mother's voice, pretending to be her and claiming that she was fine. Seth immediately contacted the police and asked them to send a unit to their home as soon as possible. However, when the police arrived, they found that no one was home, and they could not find a good reason to break in at that time. Therefore, the only attempts made that day were to trace Beverly's phone signal and check her bank card activity. Since Beverly's car was also missing, it was put on a statewide manhunt. And it was the vehicle that led to a lead just 2 days later, when a patrolman spotted it in a Denver suburb and decided to check the paperwork and see if it was the right car. A creepy find in the boot. The car seemed strange to the police officer even before he checked the license plate number and made sure it belonged to the missing woman. When the last doubts were gone, the police officer approached the driver and asked for identification. The driver was a young man with long hair that partially covered his face. He was visibly nervous, and when he was asked to show his documents again, he simply pushed the throttle to the floor, sped off, and sped down the road at full speed. The police officer began to chase the fugitive and radioed for backup. But just a couple of minutes later, while trying to make a sharp turn at high speed, the car skidded, went off the road, and hit a tree. The driver was wearing a seatbelt, and the airbags deployed, leaving him unharmed. Ari tried to run away, but was thrown to the ground by police officers as soon as he left the vehicle. On examining the vehicle, the police found several large, sealed plastic containers in the boot of the vehicle, which they opened to their shock and horror. Inside were fragments of a dismembered female body, covered with a strange-smelling, murky liquid. The interrogation and the killer's attempts to evade responsibility. Once Ari was brought to the station for questioning, he stated that he had schizophrenia, autism, psychosis, and bipolar affective disorder, as his psychiatrist could confirm. He also added that he was unable to distinguish between right and wrong because of his diagnoses, so he did not know what he was doing. He then asked whether he would be tried if his diagnoses were confirmed and what punishment he would face. Ari categorically refused to plead guilty. During interrogations, he would call himself a god or claim that he was possessed by demons and needed the help of an exorcist. At times, Ari's speech became incoherent, as if he began to talk to an invisible interlocutor, completely ignoring the police. The psychiatric examination confirmed that the accused indeed suffers from a number of mental disorders, but at the same time, it was proved that he is quite able to give an account of his actions. Also during the interrogations, the psychiatrist who observed the guy's behavior concluded that even when talking to himself, he always listened attentively to what was being said to him and what questions were being asked. This was evident from his reactions, clarifications, and sudden mood swings. The main reason why Ari was so vividly and demonstratively showing his insanity was an attempt to avoid severe punishment and minimize his responsibility before the law. He was clever and intelligent enough, so he tried to confuse the investigation and convince others of his insanity. The investigation and the unexpected results of the search. Despite the fact that from the very beginning, no one doubted that Ari had committed a terrible crime, his guilt had to be proved, and this required hard evidence. It was decided to start with a search in their family home, where, as expected, the murder took place. There, the police found washed-up traces of blood on the kitchen floor, in the corridor, and in the bathroom. In the dishwasher lay a bloody hacksaw, which the young man had apparently used to cut up his mother's body. The place for this gruesome act was the bathtub, which had numerous jagged chips on its edges. The expert examination showed that Beverly was poisoned with potassium cyanide, and after her death, her body was dismembered with a hacksaw and packed into containers. Vials with the said poisonous substance were found in the kitchen, in Ari's room, as well as in the basement of the house, where the guy had a kind of chemical laboratory. In addition, in his bedroom, under the bed was found the corpse of Beverly's favorite cat, which was also poisoned with poison. This suggested that the perpetrator first practiced on the animal before killing the mother. By the way, remember the strange liquid in which the fragments of the dismembered body were placed? As it turned out, it had a special chemical composition which is able to accelerate the process of decomposition of tissue. Ari found the recipe on the internet and decided to literally dissolve the corpse and hide the bones in the mountains so that they would never be found. A picture of the crime and the killer's justification. Based on all the evidence found, the following picture of the massacre emerged. On the eve of the tragedy, Ari had a big row with his mother and threatened to kill her again. He was so convincing that Beverly, seriously afraid for her life, called her son's psychiatrist with a request to immediately hospitalize him. However, the specialist ignored the request, believing that his patient was not dangerous to others. In the evening, the young man, having previously tested the effects of the poison on a cat, poisoned his mother, took her body to the bathroom, and began to cut it up with a hacksaw. How he got his mother to take potassium cyanide remains a mystery to this day. It probably took Ari all night to complete the gruesome job because in the morning, when Seth called the house phone, the perpetrator was still in the house. Ari then carelessly cleaned up the blood, stuffed the saw into the dishwasher, and packed the body into several containers filled with chemicals. He took the containers to the boot of his mother's car, which he used to leave the house. The further events are already known to you. When this version was presented to the defendant, supported by hard evidence, he suddenly began to justify himself and change his testimony. Ari stated that his mother took her own life by taking the poison voluntarily, and he only found her lifeless body. According to the guy, he was greatly afraid that he would be left without means of subsistence, as he himself did not work and lived at her expense. Then he decided to get rid of the body so that she would be considered missing. According to his plan, he himself was to remain living in the house and could continue to use the deceased's bank cards and accounts. The young man's story sounded wild and crazy. There was no doubt in anyone's mind that he was mentally ill, but it was also obvious that he had carefully planned the crime in advance. It was not a temporary insanity, a state of affect, or a fit of aggression. He had thought out every step and acted accordingly to the plan. One of the main evidences that the crime was pre-planned was Ari's possession of chemicals accelerating decomposition of the body, which he had purchased in advance. Moreover, according to his search history, he had studied them in detail months before the crime, the trial, and sentence. As I have already said, the psychiatric examination confirmed Ari's diagnoses, but the experts gave an unequivocal conclusion that he was aware of his actions and had carefully prepared in advance for the massacre of his mother. He himself continued to insist on his insanity, although he realized that it was useless to feign insanity. The trial took place in November of the same year, a month and a half after the crime that shook the entire state. Lawyers desperately tried to prove that the defendant cannot be criminally responsible because of his illness and needs treatment. Ari himself claimed that his mother hated him, so passed the hereditary disease to him, while his sister was completely normal. He also called himself a victim of crazy Beverly and blamed his parent for all his troubles. Seth appeared in court as a witness and said that his late lover, and he himself, frankly afraid of Ari because they did not know what to expect from him. He was incredibly cruel to others, showed sadistic tendencies, and refused to take prescribed medication to suppress outbursts of aggression. He also added that Beverly's fear for her son had transformed into her fear of her own son. The court found Ari Liot guilty of first-degree premeditated murder and sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of ever being eligible for parole. The jury unanimously found his actions to be cold-blooded and calculated. The 26-year-old defendant listened to his verdict in silence, his head down, and seemingly unconcerned. Libby Liot, after the trial, admitted that she believed her brother was 100% guilty of what he had done. But at the same time, she noted that, perhaps, the tragedy could have been avoided if the specialists to whom the family repeatedly turned for help conscientiously performed their duties and in time to respond to the alarming messages Beverly. As of today, Ari Liot is serving his life sentence in a Colorado state prison. All of his attempts to appeal and challenge the court's decision have been rejected. Imagine that today we will visit a Hollywood movie studio where they shoot the best movies in the world of different genres. But instead of a movie pavilion, we will find ourselves in Wilbur, Nebraska, and our movie for today is a bloody thriller. Nebraska is the territory of the Great Plains. It is located in Tornado Alley. In spring and summer, there are often severe thunderstorms and tornadoes. Nebraska is the only tri-state that is landlocked, which means to get from Nebraska to the ocean, bay, you have to cross 3 states. Passing motorists don't like to stop on a dark country road, but a flat tire forced Michael to make a stop on a remote dark highway. He pulled over to the side of the road and got out of the car. As he walked around the car, his attention was drawn to a large black bag, the kind used for throwing out garbage, but the bag had an unusual shape. Michael returned to the car, took a flashlight from the glove compartment, and illuminated the bag. It was torn open. There was a stain on the ground around it. Something had leaked out of it, and something light-colored was flickering out of the holes. Moving closer, the man froze at what he saw. A human hand was sticking out of the bag. A call to the emergency services raised the whole town. A few minutes later, investigators arrived on the country highway and thoroughly inspected the area. They confirmed that the package they found contained human remains. The package was sent for examination, and the searchers continued to comb the surrounding area. The recovered remains were soon identified. The victim was 24-year-old Cindy Loof. Sydney Irene Luff was born on August 21, 1993 in Broken Bow, Nebraska. She grew up in Arcadia with her parents George and Susie Luff. Sydney's family moved to Neelai in 2000, at which time she was in second grade. Her mother Susie was a special education teacher, and her father George was the school principal. Sydney was always a very active child. The girl had a normal, happy childhood filled with a love of nature. She loved fishing, which her father always took her to. During her school years, Cindy played basketball and golf, where she made good progress, but developed scoliosis, curvature of the spine, forced to give up many of her favorite hobbies and put a cross on her sports career. In 2011, after graduating from high school, Sydney got a job at a local Menards store that specialized in home improvement products. The Loofs were a close-knit family, and when Sydney had to move from Norfolk to Lincoln because of work, they all made sure to keep in touch almost every day and often met for dinner. Even though Sydney lived separately, she often returned home to her parents' house. But lately, Sydney had been struggling with depression and felt that the medications she was taking were only making things worse. Susie was very worried about her daughter and recommended a new doctor for her. He prescribed her various medications. In phone conversations with her mom, Sydney told how her inner state was getting back to normal, her voice sounding quite optimistic. She was trying to make some changes in her life and was looking for a new job. For a young woman, working in a store was not the limit of her dreams. She did not know what she wanted to become or what to do with her career, and these worries led to a rather depressive state. In November 2017, her mental state deteriorated to the point where she started taking antidepressants and sometimes allowed herself to smoke pot. Her family and friends were supportive in every way possible, but she wanted not only companionship, but also love. Being young and modern, Sydney had an interest in the female gender, so she would sometimes look for other girls on social media for dating purposes. To find a friend, Sydney used Tinder, an app that allows millions of people around the world to find, fall in love, and date. In November 2017, she found a girl named Audrey, and the girl replied to her. They began to correspond. The girls found many common interests, such as gambling, hiking, and delicious food. Already after 100 messages, they decided to meet. On November 14th, Sydney headed over to Audrey's house to Wilbur. Their first meeting went so well that Sydney was very happy. They liked each other and agreed to meet again at Audrey's house. On November 15th, Sydney worked her shift at the store and went home. She cleaned herself up, styled her hair, and did her makeup. Before going out, she took a photo and posted it on Tinder with the caption, "Ready for my date." After the photo, she got a message to go out, with Audrey waiting for her in the car. The girls drove off. The next day, Sydney Loof didn't show up for work. But even though she had been in high spirits for the past few days because of her new acquaintance, her family was concerned when co-workers informed them that she didn't show up for work because it was nothing like their responsible Sydney. Susie spoke of her daughter suffering from anxiety and deep depression. Just days before her disappearance, Loof had discussed her deteriorating mental health with her family, who advised her to see a doctor again to take antidepressants. That was the last time Loof's family saw Sydney. The girl's parents went to her apartment and were extremely surprised that Sydney had left her favorite cat Mimsy without food or water. This was extremely unlike a caring landlady. The parents knew how much Sydney loved her cat and never left her alone for long. They were concerned and reported Sydney missing to the police. The apartment itself was locked. When the police did a welfare check of Sydney's home, they saw nothing out of the ordinary. But the family was adamant. Something was wrong, and the police took their concerns seriously. On November 16, 2017, the 5'7" blonde was reported missing after she failed to show up at the showroom of the Menard store where she worked, at 27th Street and Cornhusker Highway. Sydney suffered from a spinal condition and walked in a different way that would make her stand out from the crowd. She was wearing a white Columbia brand jacket and a cream-colored shirt. When testifying about the prior events before she went missing, her parents told police that she told her friend on Snapchat Wednesday morning that she had gone on a date with a woman she met online Tuesday night and planned to meet up with her again Wednesday night. Sydney's car, which she left in Northeast Lincoln, was found. Police officers said they have conducted interviews and were looking for any leads that could lead to Sydney or her trail. Loof's family distributed flyers saying she may have been abducted 40 miles southwest of Lincoln, where the latest information indicated her cell phone was communicating with a tower. The flyer also noted that there was no activity in her bank account and that her cell phone was turned off the night she disappeared. The flyers gave a description of the young woman and distinguishing features such as several tattoos, one on her arm with the words, "Everything will be great someday," a yin-yang sign under her elbow, and the word "believe" on her wrist. Anyone with information on Sydney Loof's whereabouts has been asked to contact police by phone. A huge appeal to find Sydney was launched, which included highway billboards with the girl's picture, and a manhunt was also launched on the TV news. Susie persisted in claiming that something had happened to Sydney after the date her daughter had gone on. To prove her point, she took a screenshot of a post that Sydney posted on Snapchat with her picture and the caption, "Ready for my date." Sydney's friends confirmed that she was going on a date with a woman she met through Tinder named Audrey. During the search, police reviewed Sydney's phone records and surveillance footage from the store where she worked and quickly identified the person they wanted to talk to. The last time Sydney's phone rang a cell tower in the Wilbur neighborhood, probably not far from Audrey's home, but police had no idea who she was. Authorities began searching for a woman named Audrey, the last person to see Sydney alive, but no one knew how to find her because no one knew who she was or if she had a real name. To the police's rescue came Sydney's friend Brooklyn, who decided to find Audrey herself through Tinder. She downloaded the app, found Audrey, and exchanged phone numbers with her. That's how police learned Audrey's real name. She turned out to be 26-year-old Bailey Boswell. It turned out that Bailey's apartment is within reach of the very cell tower where Sydney's phone was last seen connected to the tower. It also became known that this apartment Bailey shared with her partner, 52-year-old Aubrey Trail. So who are Bailey and Aubrey? Bailey Boswell grew up in Lyons, Iowa. She grew up in a wholesome, normal family, was a friendly kid, and did well in school. Bailey had success in basketball and was an excellent runner. However, after losing her father, her life changed direction, and after graduating from high school, Bailey went down the wrong path. Bad company, alcohol, and illicit drugs came into her life. On one of the dating websites, she met Aubrey after looking for a daddy status. Aubrey Trail had a depressing past. He had multiple fraud charges, fraudulent check fraud, and theft. Aubrey created his own cult where he called himself the Vampire Daddy. He paid women $200 a week to follow his rules. The rules were strange enough, but there were women who believed Aubrey. At the time of Sydney's disappearance, Aubrey and Bailey were ordered by the court to pay over $400,000 for fraud. They also had numerous misdemeanors on the two of them, but the couple managed to go on the run. On November 19, 2017, after obtaining a warrant, police searched Bailey and Aubrey's home. An inspection of the apartment revealed that some of the walls had been scrubbed with bleach, which was confirmed by a neighbor who had noticed the acrid smell of chlorinated substances 2 days earlier. Police actively began searching for the suspects. While on the run, they posted videos on Facebook saying they had no involvement in Sydney's disappearance and hoped for her safe return. Bailey claimed she went on 2 dates with Sydney, but dropped her off at a friend's house and never heard from her again. She said, "I just want Sydney's family to know that I'm really sorry, but I had nothing to do with it. I hope Sydney is found very soon. She's a lovely, amazing girl." It took police a few days to track down the couple, but they eventually found them at a hotel in Branson, Missouri. Bailey Boswell and Aubrey Trail were taken into custody. A few weeks after Sydney was reported missing, after carefully analyzing phone records and Bailey's location records, police discovered Sydney's remains. She had been dismembered. Her body had been cut into 14 pieces, and police found 13 of her body parts in black plastic garbage bags in ditches in Clay County. Some of her organs, including her heart, were missing. This is just horrific. A total of 16 crime scenes were found with Sydney's remains or personal belongings. Her car keys, driver's license, phone case were found along the highway. All the routes matched the movements of the two perpetrators. Forensics conducted autopsies on 13 body parts that were found. There were abrasions on Sydney's wrists, a bump on her head, torn earlobes, abrasions and contusions on her back. There were wounds on her body indicating that Sydney had fought for her life. The heartbreaking discovery shocked not only Sydney Loof's family and friends, but all of Nebraska. On December 11, 2017, the Loof family held a private funeral for Sydney at the Lutheran church the girl attended during her lifetime. Bailey and Aubrey were charged with first-degree murder, improper disposal of human remains, and conspiracy to commit a felony. Bailey pleaded not guilty to all 3 charges. Aubrey also pleaded not guilty to felony murder and conspiracy, but pleaded guilty to improper disposal of human remains. Each successive deposition of Aubrey differed from the previous one. The man was constantly confused, changing the course of action and adding different actors. When Aubrey first talked to the police after his arrest, he told them about the cult he and Bailey were involved in. He talked about witchcraft and told them that he was a vampire who could fly. Aubrey portrayed himself as the leader of this cult and a vampire, and assured them that he had witches in the cult who had to kill another woman to get powers. So at one of his first court hearings, he admitted that he killed Sydney Loof, but did it completely by accident. He said that he paid her $5,000 to fulfill his intimate fantasy with 2 other women. Sydney agreed, but died accidentally during the intimate act when he accidentally strangled her with a cord. He also admitted that he disposed of the body by cutting her into pieces, as it was a ritual in accordance with his religious beliefs. He had to drain all the blood to release her soul to the gods in a sacred place and lay out her body parts to help her reincarnate faster. But this version turned out to be false. Surveillance footage provided, dated November 14th, shows Bailey and Aubrey checking into a hotel in Lincoln, not far from where Sydney lives. And then, on November 15th, they visit a home improvement store, which shows them buying a gruesome array of tools: a hacksaw, chlorine bleach, a folding saw, a stationery knife, and the bags used for Sydney's remains. On November 15th at 12:01 in the afternoon, a surveillance camera captured Sydney crossing paths with Aubrey at the Menards store during business hours, but the girl had no idea at the time who he was or how cruelly fate would play her. On June 11th, 2018, the first court hearing was held for the murder and improper burial of Sydney Loof's remains. Separate trials were ordered, but the charge was essentially the same for both. The trials were held in Lexington because attorneys argued that Bailey and Aubrey would not get a fair trial in Wilbur because of the publicity surrounding the case. The prosecution argued that Sydney was murdered. She was strangled, and the crime was a premeditated attack that was carefully planned. Aubrey and Bailey were declared ringleaders of a group that was interested in recruiting young women for intimate games. Bailey therefore used Tinder to find the women. At trial, the jury heard testimony from 3 other women who said they had been in relationships with Aubrey and Bailey at different times, and their acquaintance also began on Tinder. All of them had been involved with Bailey and had participated in intimate acts with Bailey and Aubrey. One woman said she even traveled with them after they met. She said Aubrey gave her a weekly allowance of $200 and invited her to join his cult. He called the cult members witches and said she had to torture and kill someone to join them. She testified that Bailey was called a witch queen. Another woman testified that Bailey talked in great detail about breaking her fingers and her desire to dismember the body. She liked to talk about torture. All 3 women who testified made it clear that both Bailey and Aubrey were involved in all the talk about torture and the crime. It is quite strange that in our modern world, there are still people who believe in the horrors of exorcism and try to assure the rest of us that they do. Talking about the investigation and the evidence obtained, the prosecution reconstructed the picture of what happened on the tragic evening of November 15, 2017. Sydney was getting ready for a date with a woman she had known for a couple days. They texted on Tinder and Bailey picked Sydney up from her apartment. They went for a ride in Bailey's car. After a while, the car stopped at Bailey's house, where Sydney was lured into the apartment. There, Bailey and Aubrey pounced on her as soon as she went inside and strangled her with an extension cord on the living room floor. The apartment was then thoroughly cleaned out by Bailey and Aubrey, a part the prosecution alleged was also pre-planned. They then cut Sydney into pieces and dumped her remains in Clay County the next day, November 16th. The court heard from their landlord, Jennifer Call, who testified that on November 16th, as soon as she drove into the garage, she smelled chlorine and the odor intensified when she entered the house. According to the medical examiner's testimony, Sydney's death was ruled a homicide, and the cause of death was asphyxiation. Toxicology reports indicated that Sydney had antidepressants in her system. The court learned that in addition to the missing organs, the part of Sydney's body that was not found was her upper left arm, the part just above the elbow and below the shoulder. Prosecutors had demanded the death penalty for both criminals, and the case would be retried if the sentence was unjust. But Aubrey, once again, denied involvement in the occult and pleaded guilty only to improperly burying the remains. At one point during Aubrey's trial, he shouted that Bailey had nothing to do with Sydney's death. "Bailey is innocent, damn you all." He then slashed his throat 3 times with a razor blade. He survived and was remanded into custody until he made a full recovery. After that, he did not attend court for several weeks. The next time he entered the courtroom was during the defense phase and only when he was scheduled to testify. When he was brought into court, he smirked and told the judge, "I'll be good." It is unusual for a defendant to testify at his own trial. Usually, defense attorneys advise the defendant not to testify because it may cause more problems for him on cross-examination. Some reveal too much, some can't answer questions straightforwardly, and some are hostile to attorneys asking questions, which creates a bad impression for jurors. But this was not unusual in Aubrey's case, as he had many interactions with police after his arrest. He had given the police his version of events, and at trial, he wanted to change his story. Therefore, the court needed to hear his new version of events. He decided to skip the rest of the trial and only returned for the last hearing with his horrible scars clearly visible when he testified in his defense. Aubrey Trail took the stand and shocked his attorneys by admitting that he had previously lied to authorities and his own legal team about the death of Sydney Loof. In a new version of the testimony he gave, he admitted that they met with Sydney in March 2017 and he paid her to participate in his illegal activities because she needed the money. He said they did not keep in touch, but in November 2017, Bailey wanted to rekindle the relationship and she contacted Sydney again. Sydney needed money, and Aubrey said that's why he was in Menards that day, November 15th. He offered her $5,000 to be part of his antique gang. The three of them ended up engaging in an intimate act later that night, and Sydney accidentally choked to death because of the extension cord they used in their games. "I don't know if Sydney had a seizure or something, but that's when she stopped breathing," said Aubrey. He told the court that there was no ritual involved in cutting up Sydney's body, and all the talk of witches, vampires, and blood-sucking was simply not true. He confessed that he only dismembered her because he couldn't put her body in the car. He said he panicked and dumped her body in the Clay County field as soon as dawn broke on the morning of November 16th. When asked why he didn't seek help if her death was accidental, he said no one would believe him. Aubrey admitted to disposing of Sydney's body, but claimed her death was accidental when they used an extension cord during their games. At Bailey's trial, she admitted to nothing. In fact, her attorneys argued that she was also victimized by Aubrey. Her attorney told the court that when she met Aubrey, she was a vulnerable young woman. At the time, she was living alone, working as a waitress in Princeton, Missouri. The defense argued that Bailey had nothing to do with either Sydney's death or the disposition of her remains, but that again proved to be false. The cell phone that Bailey used to access her Tinder account was used near where Sydney's body parts were found, and it was through a detailed analysis of her phone and location records that the police were able to find all of Sydney's remains. The court also learned that it was Bailey who contacted Sydney and arranged to meet her. She was the one who drove to Sydney's duplex to pick her up on the evening of November 15th. The prosecution told the court that Bailey derived satisfaction from discussing acts of cruelty, and she enjoyed talking about torture with Aubrey. Evidence was presented at trial proving a planned crime. On the day Sydney was killed, Aubrey and Bailey were together at a store where they bought tools, including a hacksaw, scissors, and a box cutter from Home Depot. Around noon that day, Bailey sent Sydney a text message asking how her day was going. Phone records and surveillance footage show that Bailey was in the Menards parking lot with Aubrey when she sent that text message on Tinder. And although Sydney worked at Menards, it appears she was unaware that Bailey was there. A few hours later, Bailey sent Sydney another message on Tinder, alerting her that she was at her apartment and ready to pick her up soon. Phone records indicate that instead of going on a date, as Sydney believed, they went to the apartment where Bailey and Aubrey lived. Bailey's attorney, Todd Lancaster, argued that as to Bailey, the evidence showed that Bailey was guilty of purchasing bleach and garbage bags to use to dispose of Sydney's body, and as such, she could be charged with aiding and abetting the improper disposal of human remains. On November 8, 2021, Bailey Boswell was sentenced to life in prison. The Loof family had been seeking justice for 3 years, mourning and longing for their Sydney, and they awaited a judgment that gave them comfort. On July 11, 2019, it took a jury less than 3 hours to find Aubrey Trail guilty of premeditated conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and improper burial of human remains. The 3-judge panel called his crime cold and calculated. In a second phase of the trial to determine whether he should be executed, county prosecutors kept their promise and secured the death penalty for Aubrey Trail. Thus, on June 9, 2021, Aubrey Trail was executed by lethal injection. The con man, accused of a brutal crime against Nebraska woman Sydney Loof, allegedly convinced members of his cult that he was a flying, mind-reading vampire with a coven of a dozen witches who he claimed would get their powers by killing people. But thankfully, in real-life stories, justice prevails, and in our story, the trial brought the monster to the end of his trail in our world. The teenage years are the most challenging of all the stages of growing up. Not a child anymore, but not yet an adult, this time can be characterized. The body undergoes a massive hormonal overhaul, further complicating this transitional period. Yesterday's obedient child becomes unstable and prone to rebellion. A teenager's worldview is a picture of contrasts consisting of black and white tones. The prevailing color in a teen's judgments and actions largely depends on their environment. The story we're about to discuss occurred in Medicine Hat, in the southeast of Alberta, Canada. Incomprehensible cruelty and betrayal befell the Richardson family. Their tragedy gained national attention, and once again, the Gothic subculture came under fire. In town, the Richardson family was considered exemplary. Deborah and Mark, along with their children, 8-year-old Tyler and 12-year-old Jasmine, lived in a beautiful and cozy place. Like all Canadians, they were very hospitable and sociable. Their home was often filled with guests, and the atmosphere was built on principles of love and respect. Everything was going well until the eldest daughter entered puberty. The once calm girl changed beyond recognition. First and foremost, Jasmine's character changed. She became bold and frivolous. Conflicts between her and her parents began to occur, and her academic performance dropped. Secondly, her preferences in music and clothing transformed. Whereas she previously enjoyed modern pop, she now took an interest in heavy rock. Bright colors and clothing were replaced by shades of gray and black, and her dressing style became provocative. Jasmine wanted to appeal to boys, so she began to emphasize her rounded shapes. Her interaction with former friends noticeably decreased. She began to spend more time alone in front of her computer screen. The door to her room was often closed. With the introduction of the internet at home, she became interested in Gothic themes, dark poetry, criminal psychology, and human anatomy. Miss Richardson even identified herself as a witch, preaching the Wiccan religion. For this purpose, she visited various websites of similar nature, where she found a circle of friends who shared her interests. "Welcome to my tragic world," was the greeting on her social media page. It seemed like a typical adolescence, spiced with excessive dramatism and mysticism. However, the girl became more and more detached from her family. In her profile, she listed a fictitious name and age of 15. She liked older interlocutors, wanting to match them. Her parents tried to support their daughter during this difficult period, suggesting spending time together. They looked for common ground, activities. However, she found this uninteresting. Jasmine considered her younger brother to be an annoying nuisance, thus she spoke to him less and less. Yet she could spend hours on end at the computer, talking to strangers. Deborah and Mark understood that this state was temporary. She would grow up, become wiser. Therefore, they were quite tolerant of her new hobbies. One day, Jasmine told them she would like to go to a concert of a punk rock band. Her parents agreed, if only they knew what this outing would lead to. Early 2006, Jasmine Richardson went to a concert of a local youth band, pursuing her own interests, knowing he would be there. Jeremy Steinke, the boy who had been stirring her heart for months, he too was fascinated by Gothic culture. They met on a vampire enthusiast's website, where they occasionally communicated. Jeremy portrayed himself as a 300-year-old werewolf thirsting for blood. To prove it, he wore a vial of blood around his neck, though it was unclear whether the fluid was of human or animal origin. Nonetheless, the boy clearly considered himself special, which Jasmine found very appealing. Meeting at the concert, the young people grew even fonder of each other. Eventually, Steinke asked her out, and she joyfully accepted. All would be fine, except Jeremy was 23 years old. The couple knew her parents would disapprove of their relationship, so they kept it a secret. Moreover, his troubled past would hardly endear him to them. The young man was poor and lived in a trailer with his mother and sister. His relationship with his mother was strained due to her excessive drinking. Jeremy had endured her constant stream of volatile partners who often beat him in their drunken rages. As a result, by the age of 13, he was struggling academically and had a fragile psyche. Once, unable to bear such a life, Steinke attempted to hang himself, but was fortunately stopped in time. Afterward, doctors diagnosed him with depression and hyperactivity. Bullied at school, he decided to stop attending. Over time, Jeremy fancied himself immortal and began frequenting websites of similar themes. His online profile was filled with topics like pain, self-harm, blood, and razor blades. No one knew about the couple's forbidden relationship except their friends, who found their love, to say the least, peculiar. Their communication would have remained a secret had the Richardsons not started monitoring their daughter's excessive internet use. Deborah and Mark discovered Jasmine was corresponding with strangers, alarming them as any parent would. Therefore, they decided to remove the computer from the girl's reach. Moreover, they were shocked to learn she had fallen for an adult man with dubious interests. His very nickname, Soul Eater, spoke volumes. Thus, Jasmine and Jeremy's relationship became forbidden. To help their daughter break free from this destructive relationship, Deborah and Mark sought a psychologist's help. They sincerely believed that counseling would benefit their parent-child relationship. To their delight, it did. Jasmine showed compliance and seemed to be returning to a normal life. Promising that it was all in the past, she got her computer back. This became the Richardsons' last fateful decision, leading to their demise. Saturday, April 22, 2006. Preparing for bed, Mrs. Richardson heard a noise in the basement. "Rats again," she thought. Descending, she turned on the light and saw a person in a ski mask. He stood opposite her, looking at her. Startled, she screamed. The stranger rushed at her, covering her mouth. His efforts were in vain. Deborah struggled and screamed louder. He stepped back, drew a knife, and stabbed her in the chest, then again and again. Hearing his wife's screams, Mark rushed down, grabbing the first thing he could find, a screwdriver. He had been fixing an outlet that day and by sheer chance left the tool out. Entering the basement, he was met with a horrific scene, his wife lying in a pool of blood and someone standing next to her. Mark immediately attacked the intruder but received a stab wound to the stomach, followed by more stabs. As the searing pain subsided and his eyes began to close, Mr. Richardson quietly asked, "Why?" "Because your daughter wished it," the attacker replied. Upstairs, Tyler was the only one left. The boy sat on his bed in his pajamas, too frightened to move. The approaching footsteps grew louder, and the bedroom door opened. A few days before the murder, Jasmine was overjoyed. Her parents believed in her remorse, meaning they could now communicate again. Mobile phones were just becoming popular at that time, so the computer remained the only means of communication. As soon as Miss Richardson regained internet access, she immediately wrote to Jeremy. "It all starts with them disappearing and ends with us staying together," she told him. During the days when the young lady was visiting the psychologist, a terrible plan had formed in her head. It solidified over several days of punishment. Surprisingly, Steinke found it enticing, but added that everything needed to be done creatively and with attention to detail. The couple understood that they could not be together as long as the Richardsons were alive. Later, Jasmine's friends recalled how often she spoke about her parents, particularly how much they annoyed her. Therefore, she wanted to end their lives. However, no one took Jasmine's words seriously. Saturday, April 22, 2006. Garrett headed across the street to his friend Tyler's house. The boy wanted to play. The weather was nice outside, despite being chilly. Such was the spring that year. When Garrett approached the house, he noticed the blinds were still closed. No one answered his knock on the door. Strange, he thought. The Richardsons should be home. Their car is parked in the driveway. Hoping to see someone, the child curiously peeked into the living room window but saw no one. Then, Garrett decided to walk around to the back of the basement, where he often played with Tyler. Peeking through the window, he saw something strange on the floor. It appeared to be two silhouettes in a pool of blood, the boy informed his mother. Skeptical, she decided to check on the family across the street. They approached the house together. Garrett pointed to the window he had looked through earlier. The woman looked in and recoiled in horror. She immediately called emergency services. Something happened at the Richardsons. They seemed to be lying in the basement floor, all in blood, the neighbor reported. The police arrived promptly. Breaking down the front door, they descended to where Garrett and his mother had seen something. Entering the dark basement, the officers had difficulty recognizing the people lying on the ground. Their bodies were mutilated and bloodied. But there was no doubt. It was Mark and Deborah Richardson, and they were deceased. Blood was everywhere, on the floor, walls, even the ceiling. A bloody mess. No other way to describe what was before them. Later, the police searched the house. In the upstairs children's room, they found a small child. The boy lay in bed among toys, splattered with blood with visible knife wounds. The child's throat had been deeply cut. Medicine Hat had never seen such horror. One officer said, "It will take me decades to forget what I saw today." After the house was searched, the police realized one family member was missing. The Richardsons' eldest daughter was gone. Officers worried she might be in danger. Everything indicated the attack occurred in the basement and the child's room. The rest of the house was undisturbed, and at first glance, nothing was missing. The state of the bodies suggested the crime occurred the previous night. Apparently, the perpetrator broke into the house and attacked the boy and his parents. Then what happened to Jasmine? And where was she? The police began to construct theories about what had happened. Perhaps by some stroke of luck, the girl was somewhere outside the home, safe. Or the perpetrator had abducted her and was now harming her. Or maybe a ransom demand from relatives would come with time. However, as time passed, there were no clear answers. Soon, detectives turned to the media, requesting help in the search for the missing girl. They hoped Jasmine would make contact or someone would provide valuable information. Meanwhile, the investigation into the crime continued. Investigators interviewed relatives, friends, and colleagues about all aspects of the slain family's life. Did they have any adversaries or enemies capable of such a heinous act? However, the more the investigation progressed, the clearer it became. There was no reason to wish death upon anyone in the Richardson family. They were truly wonderful people, faithful spouses and loving parents, except for the eldest daughter. Officers learned that the girl had been causing quite a bit of trouble lately. Therefore, the tone of media announcements changed. This time, the investigation wanted to locate a person of interest. It was entirely possible that the girl knew details about the crime, or she might have been involved in it. Considering the suspect's age, the media could no longer publish her real name, as per Canadian law. Thus, news agencies began to refer to Jasmine Richardson as JR. After it became known about her relationship with Jeremy Steinke, the couple was declared wanted. Initially, the search for the young lovers began among their friends and acquaintances, thinking they might be hiding out with them. However, this lead proved to be a dead end for the police, but they did uncover something intriguing. A few hours after the crime, the young couple was spotted at a restaurant and at a party hosted by an acquaintance. Someone from their circle of friends mentioned that Jasmine appeared unchanged. There was no indication she had been abducted or was in a state of shock. She was drinking and having fun. When friends asked how they managed to escape from her parents, Jasmine laughed. "Jeremy and I just took care of them." "Yes," the boy agreed. "I carved them up like fish." The party guests laughed, thinking it a grim joke, unaware that the statement was true. The involvement in the crime was also confirmed by a comic found in Jasmine's school locker, where she detailed how she would deal with each of her family members, with her boyfriend as her accomplice. Photos of the suspects were distributed widely. It was only a matter of time before a citizen would step forward with information about their whereabouts. Soon enough, information came in. The couple was spotted in the community of Leader, Saskatchewan, approximately 130 kilometers from Medicine Hat. Caught off guard, Jasmine Richardson and Jeremy Steinke were found sleeping peacefully in a pickup truck. Without resistance, they were taken to the police station. Naturally, the couple was interrogated separately, starting with Jasmine. She shared that she was deeply in love with Steinke, and he reciprocated her feelings. However, the difference in age and social status was a barrier between them. According to Jasmine, the Richardsons would never have accepted their relationship. Therefore, Jeremy committed the ultimate act of love. He ended her parents' lives, providing them the chance to be together. When detectives asked if Jasmine was involved in the crime, she said, "I wasn't home when the crimes occurred. I didn't know about what had happened. After I found out, I accepted it. I love Jeremy very much, so I ran away with him." Detectives needed to determine who was the main instigator. Since breaking the suspects proved difficult, the investigation used a cunning strategy. They placed an informant in the cell with Jeremy, who skillfully extracted details that contradicted Jasmine's statements. Jeremy confessed to the informant that the plan to end her parents' lives was Jasmine's idea. Initially, he was not supportive, but agreed after they discovered the forbidden love and took away her computer. I took care of Deborah and Mark Richardson, and Jasmine took care of her younger brother herself. She literally begged me to leave Tyler for her, though I was glad to settle scores with all of them, Jeremy cruelly revealed. After this confession, investigators confronted Miss Richardson with the recording. She had no choice but to confess to everything, admitting she stabbed her younger brother out of mercy, not wanting to leave him an orphan. Later, the couple shared their social media profiles and passwords with the investigation, which began to examine their correspondence. They had sent each other thousands of messages, confirming Jeremy's statements. Jasmine indeed conceived the plan on her own. Steinke wrote that Jasmine was the only person who supported and approved of his tastes, replacing the society he felt alienated from. Fearing he would lose her, he helped realize the dreadful idea. I want to slit their throats. They will regret what they have done, especially when I make sure they're gone. They'll pay for the insults. Finally, there will be silence. Their blood will be the payment. Jeremy supported his beloved. His friends also reported that just a few hours before the attack, they watched the 1994 film Natural Born Killers, which portrays a couple committing 9 heinous murders. This story inspired their friend, who said he wanted to enact a similar plan with his girlfriend. "I think it's the best love story of all time," Steinke said. With sufficient evidence at hand, the suspects were charged with 3 counts of homicide. The detectives pieced together the confessions of the accused, witness testimonies, and other case evidence to form a clear picture of the crime. Before the act, Jeremy was intoxicated. Jasmine led him into the house and guided him to the basement, where he attacked her mother. Deborah was the first to die, suffering 12 stab wounds across her body. The deepest wound pierced her chest, reaching 12 centimeters deep and striking her heart. In a rage, Jeremy mercilessly continued his assault on Mark, who sustained 24 wounds, 9 of which were in the back. Like his wife, the family patriarch bled out on the basement floor. Tyler Richardson was the last to die. While Steinke was dealing with the parents downstairs, Jasmine inflicted 5 stab wounds on her younger brother upstairs. After Jeremy finished, he went upstairs to help his girlfriend with the child, coldly slashing the boy's throat as if carving a pumpkin. Afterward, Jeremy went home to wash off the blood, while Jasmine caught a taxi to a restaurant where the couple had agreed to meet. After discussing the night's events, they headed to a party. A friend of Jeremy's, Casey Lancaster, helped them dispose of the evidence and reach Saskatchewan. Words fail to describe the horror they created. The couple embarked on their murderous spree with such ease and nonchalance as if driven by some otherworldly force. It is shocking that during interrogations and their time in custody, not a word of regret or remorse was uttered for their actions. While detained, they wrote letters to each other, calling themselves legends and immortals. In one letter, Steinke proposed to Richardson, who joyfully accepted. Then, unexpectedly, their mad love began to fade like last year's snow. During the trial, they shifted the blame onto each other. In June 2007, Jasmine Richardson was the first to stand trial. She pleaded not guilty, claiming to have been in a zombie-like state and unable to act while Jeremy was killing her family. She also claimed she only wounded her younger brother, and it was Steinke who delivered the fatal blow. Jasmine insisted that their discussions about ending her parents' lives were purely hypothetical, but they appealed to Jeremy so much that he compelled her to turn them into reality. Under 3 counts of homicide, Miss Richardson was sentenced to just 10 years in prison, thanks to the nuances of Canadian juvenile criminal justice law, which states that individuals under 14 cannot be sentenced to more than 10 years of imprisonment. The sentence was aimed more at rehabilitating and restoring the girl's psyche than punishing her. In 2008, Jeremy Steinke's trial commenced. He insisted he had no initial intention of ending the lives of his girlfriend's parents. However, once discovered in the basement, he felt compelled to attack. He claimed he did not harm Tyler, suggesting Jasmine was responsible while he merely watched from the doorway. The defense argued that Jasmine had intentionally seduced him, wishing for him to free her from her parents' strict control. Some friends testified that Jeremy had sought their help with the act, driven by his fear of losing Jasmine to the extent of being willing to do anything. The lawyers also requested the charges be reduced to manslaughter, arguing Steinke was under the influence of substances at the time of the act. Steinke's inconsistencies emerged when, asked by the prosecution why he committed the act, he replied, "When you find your other half, you do whatever it takes for them." Throughout the trial, he remained indifferent to the proceedings, but broke down when Jacqueline May, his mother, testified in his defense. She admitted to bearing significant guilt for his upbringing, as he was often attacked by her partners, subjected to beatings and rejection. Steinke was found guilty on 3 counts of first-degree homicide, receiving 3 life sentences. He would be eligible for parole no earlier than 25 years later, in 2033. Charges of complicity in the act against Casey Lancaster were dropped. In Medicine Hat Court, she was found guilty of obstruction of justice, sentenced to a year of house arrest, and prohibited from consuming drugs and alcohol. While in custody, Jeremy Steinke changed his name to Jackson May. Jasmine Richardson's 10-year sentence included 4 years in a psychiatric facility, where she was diagnosed with conduct disorder and oppositional defiant disorder, indicative of a refusal to follow rules and socially unacceptable behavior, typically more associated with children than adults. This underscored her psychological immaturity and instability during her relationship with Steinke. In her final years under conditional community supervision and attending special programs, medical professionals reported her genuine remorse. After serving her full sentence, she was released in 2016. Currently, Jasmine Richardson lives in Canada under an assumed name. Her true identity still protected from media disclosure. Her return sparked significant public debate, with some arguing she deserved a second chance, while others believe she warranted a harsher penalty. Nonetheless, the residents of Medicine Hat would prefer not to have Miss Richardson as their neighbor again, given the brutality of her crime. Whether Jasmine has truly changed after spending her formative years in detention remains to be seen. Time will tell. The dark secrets of a rich and happy family. It's often said that great wealth can corrupt even the best of people, but in reality, that's not entirely accurate. Wealth simply amplifies the existing negative qualities in a person, providing a sense of impunity and permissiveness. While the absence of money is certainly not pleasant, it's important to remember that banknotes, jewels, and figures on bank accounts, by themselves, cannot bring happiness, especially if they were obtained through dishonest means or at the expense of someone else's life. The case of Syed and Leon Brits in 2020 shook not just South Africa, where this dramatic story unfolded, but also the entire world. The investigation promised to be challenging, with an innocent individual initially becoming the main suspect. It wasn't until an unexpected and heartfelt confession emerged that the true perpetrator, who had the least malice towards the victim, was identified. Now, let's delve into the complicated scheme from the beginning, where money became a stumbling block in what many considered to be a large, harmonious family. The Brits family. The Brits, a family of European immigrants, settled in the early 1970s in the small but cozy town of Pofadder, located in the Northern Cape province of South Africa. Despite its modest size, this town is an important economic and tourist hub in the region known as Bushmanland. It's also worth noting that the surrounding landscapes are incredibly picturesque, attracting biologists and researchers with their diverse flora and fauna. In 1976, the Brits had their first son, whom they named Toki, and in 1979, their second son, Leon, was born. Even by local standards, the family was considered quite affluent. The family patriarch owned what was arguably the only major hotel in the area, which eventually grew into a comprehensive hotel and restaurant complex. Both brothers excelled in school, were active in sports, and thanks to their parents' efforts, received prestigious educations. After completing his studies, Toki left his hometown while Leon, who had been helping his parents and learning the intricacies of the hotel business from his teenage years, decided to stay to eventually take over the reins of management. He was intelligent, attentive to detail, and possessed a so-called entrepreneurial vein, enabling him to manage affairs effectively. The story of Cinderella. At the hotel complex owned by the Brits family, various events, parties, and celebrations were often held. At one such event, Leon noticed a young beauty among the guests. A slender brunette with green eyes and a captivating smile caught his eye immediately. The young man decided to approach her and introduce himself, only to find out that she was just 14 years old and she was in school, though she appeared much older. This fact deeply unsettled Leon, who was already 25 at the time, but he still decided to invite the beauty for a dance, and afterward, they spent about an hour chatting while sitting on the terrace. The schoolgirl's name was Sureta, and from that very first meeting, Brits couldn't stop thinking about her, constantly dreaming of their next encounter. But let's delve a bit into who this enchanting young stranger was. Sureta Kerr was born on September 6, 1990, the youngest of 3 children in a family of immigrants from Eastern Europe. Her family lived in poverty, and her parents had been teetering on the brink of divorce for many years, exacerbating the already difficult situation. When the youngest daughter was only 9 years old, the head of the family tragically died from a venomous snake bite, leaving the mother alone with 3 children, barely making ends meet. All the Kerr children had to work to survive, making Sureta's childhood a difficult period filled with hardships and deprivation. But then, a wealthy suitor suddenly appeared in her life, ready to lay the world at her feet. Due to her young age, the girl didn't understand how to react to the attention from an adult man who was 11 years older than her. Leon seemed genuinely in love. He sought any excuse to meet with the girl, picked her up after school, took her to popular restaurants, bought expensive gifts, fashionable clothes, and tried to please her in every way possible. Sureta received things she had always been deprived of, and luxury literally went to the schoolgirl's head. She understood that with this man, she could build a family, and neither they nor their children would ever want for anything. The girl's mother, despite her daughter's young age, approved of the relationship. Leon seemed to her a reliable, decent, and kind person, and no one doubted the sincerity of his feelings. However, the young man's parents were very worried about his romance with her, as such relationships, if they went too far, could be considered a criminal offense. But the young man insisted he was willing to wait until his beloved turned 18, after which he would officially marry her. Unexpected pregnancy. About a year into their relationship, 15-year-old Sureta realized she was pregnant. She was hesitant to tell anyone, knowing that the news would not please either her mother or her lover. The girl began to wear baggy clothes to hide her changed figure and became withdrawn and uncommunicative, but she could no longer keep everything secret and decided to confess everything to her partner. The news of the impending addition was a shock to Leon. He understood that she could not only tarnish his reputation, but also lead to serious legal problems. The closeness between them had been initiated by him, and now he could be accused of seducing a teenager, which he couldn't allow. First, the man paid for a visit to a private clinic, where they not only confirmed the pregnancy, but also discovered that she was expecting twins. With the term approaching a critical point, Leon found a doctor at the same private clinic who agreed to terminate the pregnancy anonymously. Sureta was devastated and felt completely crushed, as her partner, who had promised to love and protect her, forcibly persuaded her to terminate their unborn children. However, Leon, being older, was able to pressure her and convince her of the necessity of the procedure. He promised that in the future, when they got married, they would definitely have children, but for now, it would simply destroy their lives and plans for a happy future together. The young woman had no choice but to comply, and she did as her boyfriend asked. She suffered from pain for several days after, but the physical discomfort was overshadowed by a sense of guilt and overwhelming depression. Sureta stayed in her room, cried constantly, and didn't know how to continue living with this. Her mother didn't show much interest in her condition, assuming her daughter was just upset over some argument with her boyfriend, but everything would pass once they reconciled. A couple of days later, Leon actually showed up at his beloved's doorstep and took her to the city to distract her, to walk in the park, and to browse through stores. He believed this would help her recover faster and lift her spirits. Sure enough, she soon managed to return to her previous life, but the feelings of resentment and distrust towards her partner lingered. Forced marriage. 3 years later, while the young woman was in her senior year of high school, she discovered she was pregnant again. At that time, she was only a few months away from becoming an adult, and this unexpected, delicate condition was not supposed to cause any particular issues. However, when she told Leon about it, he reacted very negatively again and insisted that his beloved terminate the pregnancy, arguing that they were too young to start a family. This time, Soretta firmly refused, stating that she would not do it and would keep the child, even if it meant raising it on her own. After some thought, Leon eventually made an official proposal, presenting her with a beautiful diamond ring. By then, their once tender feelings had considerably dulled, but this renewed promise and Soretta's ongoing pregnancy left him with no choice. By the time she graduated from high school, the changes in her figure were already obvious, and in the fall, as soon as she turned 18, the couple had a lavish wedding. The newlyweds appeared quite happy, but each had certain doubts about the correctness of their decision. A few months later, the couple had their first son, and 2 years after that, twin boys were born. The family lived in affluence, able to indulge in anything they wanted, and from the outside they looked successful, well-off, and happy. Family business. The business founded and developed over many years by Leon's parents was quite profitable. Over time, the man also started his own chain of stores and fast food eateries, and his ventures were on the rise, with the family business flourishing. However, from the mid-2010s, the family began to experience troubles and misfortunes. In 2014, Leon's father passed away suddenly due to long-standing heart issues, and his mother's health deteriorated from the shock of losing her husband. She soon showed rapidly progressing signs of dementia, forcing her sons to place her in a specialized clinic for necessary care and proper attention. Toki returned to his hometown after many years away to help his brother manage the business, and together they took over the operation of a hotel. At the same time, Leon decided to involve his wife in the family business, something she had long aspired to do. It was decided to register a mining equipment and tools store in her name. She dove into work while also continuing to raise their 3 young sons. Life between two cities. Brits, the eldest son, started elementary school in his hometown of Pofadder, but as the twins grew older, the parents faced the pressing issue of choosing a suitable educational institution for all their children. The challenge was that finding quality education in South Africa was not so straightforward. The spouses found a good school in the nearby city of Kakamas. The school was about 75 miles from Brits's home, but there was no need for daily travel back and forth. The couple decided to rent a spacious house in Kakamas, where Soretta moved with the sons, but Leon stayed in Pofadder as he could not leave the business and manage affairs remotely. However, the wife had to step back from managing the store, although she really enjoyed it and was quite successful at it. The woman dedicated herself entirely to raising the sons, and they only visited home to see their husband and father on weekends and holidays. Leon himself rarely came to Kakamas due to his busy schedule. Initially, it seemed that everything was in order, but over time, the spouses drifted further apart, and their feelings significantly cooled. Battle with a deadly illness. In 2018, Soretta started having health problems, which she did not take seriously at first. However, an examination revealed that the young woman had oncology and problems with the cardiovascular system. Soon, she underwent surgery to remove the malignant tumor and was prescribed a treatment course. Fortunately, all procedures were timely, saving the life of the mother of 3. But from then on, for prevention, she needed periodic therapy at a clinic in Johannesburg, which was quite expensive. The Brits family had the means, and Leon would never skimp on the health of his son's mother. Additionally, Sureta hired a nanny and a housekeeper who helped her around the house and looked after the children, which was essential when the woman went for treatment. By that time, the spouses had drifted so far apart that each essentially lived their own life. The young woman started an affair in Johannesburg, so when going for another course of preventive therapy, she would not stay in a hotel, but at her lover's place. Leon, apparently, also periodically had women, as compromising photos and messages found in his phone suggested. In fact, nothing but their 3 children bound the couple together anymore. Enemies and envy. The family issues did not affect the business, which continued to thrive. The hotel, stores, and restaurant chain were generating impressive profits, some of which Leon invested in real estate in major cities, earning a good income from rentals. Undoubtedly, their family was not only the wealthiest in Pofadder, but also among the most affluent in the northern Cape Province. Naturally, the Brits had many enviés and ill-wishers, whose numbers grew in proportion to the profitability of their business. Leon, his parents, and his brother regularly received threats and various demands. Leon himself often confided in his wife that he had long felt unsafe and feared that someone might try to take away his life's work. In each of Leon's offices, as well as at his and his parents' homes, there were safes and cleverly disguised hiding places storing cash in various currencies, securities, diamonds, jewelry, and gold bars. Sureta knew only about some of them, specifically those in their own home in Pofadder. Initially, the threats were a serious concern, but over time, as the man began receiving them daily, he simply stopped paying attention to them. He believed they were just attempts to intimidate him, as the ill-wishers had never tried to act on their threats. However, a tragedy soon occurred that ended Leon's life. Body in the pool. On October 7, 2020, Leon's wife called him and asked him to check on their dogs, which, according to a neighbor, had gotten out. Leon promised to call back as soon as he arrived and checked that everything was in order, but the return call never came. Concerned, Sureta called her husband's number several times, but no one answered. Leaving the children with the nanny, she drove to Pofadder. The front door was unlocked, but it seemed that no one was home. It was suspiciously quiet inside, and no one responded to her calls. She then went to the backyard, where she found her husband's body floating face down in the pool. There were wounds on his back, the water was tinged pink with blood, and it was clear that he was deceased. Panicking, Sureta called the police, the emergency services, and then dialed Toki, informing him of the incident. When law enforcement arrived, they immediately cordoned off the house as a crime scene. It was evident that the businessman's death was violent. The body had several stab wounds and signs of a struggle, and a safe in the house had been opened and its contents taken. An initial theory was that burglars had broken into the house, and the homeowner, returning unexpectedly, had caught them off guard, paying with his life. However, many other valuable items in plain sight remained untouched, suggesting the burglars had specifically targeted what was in the safe. Prime suspect. The murder of the successful and wealthy businessman quickly made a lot of noise, hotly discussed in the media and on social networks, generating numerous rumors, gossip, and speculations. Many knew about the long-standing threats against Brits and believed that competitors or ill-wishers had fulfilled their threats. However, the first and key suspect in the case became Toki, who had been managing the family business with his brother for the last few years. First, he had visited Leon shortly before the tragedy and was considered the last person to see him alive. Second, their mother was in very poor health, with doctors giving her only a few months to live, and her will, reportedly, was stored at the younger son's house. The prevailing theory was that the elder brother disagreed with the business mostly going to Leon and wanted to access the will to alter it. This explained why the other items in the house remained untouched. It was also suspected that he did not act alone, and murder was not part of the original plan. Toki categorically denied any involvement and stated that under no circumstances would he harm his own brother, especially since they had never had disputes or disagreements over financial matters. He sought support from Sureta, who asserted that she believed him and would help find the best lawyer to prove his innocence. Unexpected confession. For nearly 2 months, the investigation was at a standstill with no new evidence, leads, or witnesses emerging. However, one day, 35-year-old Jacques Van Vuren walked into the police station and offered to make a deal by pleading guilty and revealing all his accomplices in exchange for a reduced sentence. It turned out that Jacques had once attended the same school as Sureta. They were friends, and he even had feelings for her, but she did not reciprocate and soon started a relationship with Leon. The former friends had not seen each other for many years, but one day they coincidentally met at a shopping center and started talking. At that time, Jacques was going through a tough period. He had divorced his wife, lost his job, developed a dependence on alcohol, and was in dire need of money. Sureta saw that her former admirer still harbored tender feelings for her, so she began to confide in him about her unhappy marriage. She claimed that her husband mistreated her, was abusive, but she could not leave him because he threatened to take their sons and leave her with nothing. This topic was painful for Van Vuren since his ex-wife had barred him from seeing their children after the divorce, and he genuinely empathized with Sureta and wanted to help. They exchanged phone numbers, and a few days later, Sureta, having devised a cunning plan, called her former friend and tearfully told him that her husband had beaten her. She said she couldn't leave him, and the only solution was to eliminate the tyrant. Sureta was very persuasive, and Jacques believed her. Moreover, she promised him 500,000 South African rand as payment, and he, as mentioned, was in desperate need of money. Jacques agreed to help Sureta, but he did not want to do the dirty work himself, so he decided to hire other people. The plan was developed in early 2020, but due to the global epidemic that swept the world, its execution had to be delayed. During this difficult time, the Brits' family business suffered colossal losses. A store and part of the restaurants had to be closed, and Leon wanted to sell the hotel, which his wife did not agree with. In late September, the conspirators returned to the original plan, but Jacques requested half of the payment up front. However, due to financial difficulties, Sureta could only withdraw 100,000 rand and also gave her accomplice her engagement ring. With this money, Jacques hired a friend named Enrique Williams, who had drug issues and was willing to commit murder for money. However, Williams was afraid he couldn't handle a grown, strong man alone, so he brought along his 25-year-old friend, Amantla Bareki, to share the fee. Sureta gave the criminals access to the house, informed them about the safe's location, and allowed them to take whatever they liked to make the robbery look more plausible. The only condition was that the dogs should not be harmed, so she let them out in advance. The neighbors saw this and called her, signaling that Williams and Bareki were in the house, after which she called her husband and lured him into a deadly trap. When the unsuspecting man entered the house, he was struck on the head with a baseball bat by one of the lurking criminals, and another attacked him with a knife, leaving him no chance. Leon was stabbed 8 times and hit with the bat a dozen times before his lifeless body was thrown into the pool. After opening the safe, the criminals found no money, only securities, diamonds, and gold bars. They handed over the loot to Jacques, who, in turn, gave everything to Sureta. The criminals decided not to take anything else from the house, fearing they would leave too many traces. They were only counting on the large sum promised by the client. Torment of conscience and fear of inevitable punishment. Jacques was not supposed to appear at the crime scene himself. Sureta feared he would be caught on surveillance camera footage and recognized, as Toki had seen him a couple of times and knew he was his brother's wife's school friend. He was only supposed to pass on the advance payment and instructions to the accomplices. However, Jacques was anxious to ensure everything went smoothly and drove past the Brits' house several times to make sure the perpetrators were in place and the victim had arrived directly to them. His car was captured on camera, and although the license plate was not clearly visible, the police were interested in the vehicle, meaning that finding its owner was only a matter of time. Furthermore, there was no money in the safe, and all the family's accounts were frozen during the investigation. Sureta had no way to pay the hired perpetrators, as selling diamonds, bars, or securities would expose her. She asked them to wait, but Williams and Bareki were not willing to wait and began to threaten Jacques. Desperate, Jacques had not received the money, was plagued by guilt, and his accomplices threatened to deal with him. He realized that he would end up either behind bars or follow Leon. Jacques shared his concerns with his sister, who told their mother, and together the women convinced him to voluntarily surrender to the police and reveal the other participants in the plot to secure a more lenient punishment. True motives of the mastermind. Jacques, in his full account to the police, believed he had done a noble act as he saw Leon as a man who mistreated his wife, was abusive, and threatened to take away the children. However, it was actually Sureta who initially directed the police to consider Toki as the main suspect. Citing a will and property disputes between the brothers, the authorities decided to detain and interrogate the woman to uncover her true motives. It turned out that she and her husband had fallen out of love long ago, and each was living a separate life. Sureta had a lover in Johannesburg, whom she wanted to join permanently. However, when she expressed her desire to divorce, Leon categorically refused to agree. He also threatened to leave her with nothing and take the sons if she decided to leave him. It's hard to say what motivated Leon, but it's likely he still had feelings for his beautiful wife and hoped to mend their relationship. Sureta, however, decided that she would inherit his money and business upon his death, which would allow her and her lover to live comfortably. She also saw an opportunity to rid herself of Toki by framing him, thus becoming the sole owner of the hotel, stores, and restaurants after her mother-in-law's death. Her plan might have succeeded if there had been money in the safe and she had managed to pay off the hired perpetrators. Trial and sentencing of all participants. The trial of the criminal quartet took place in the spring of 2021. Each participant's role in this high-profile case was considered. Jacques Van Vuren, who made a deal with the prosecution, told everything in detail and turned in his accomplices, was sentenced to 20 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 5 years. The hired perpetrators, Enrique Williams and Amantal Bareki, were found guilty of premeditated murder with special cruelty and robbery. They were sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As for the widow who orchestrated the murder of her own husband, she managed to convince the court that she had been a victim from the very beginning of their relationship. She testified that Leon coerced her into intimacy when she was just 14 years old, and a year later, when she became pregnant, Brits, to avoid responsibility, forced her to terminate the pregnancy at a fairly late stage. In recent years, despite the disappearance of love, he refused to divorce her and threatened to take the children. Nevertheless, Sureta Brits was sentenced to 25 years in prison, with the possibility of parole from the beginning of her term. The court considered her remorse and heartfelt confession, as well as her status as the mother of 3 minor children. However, 3 years after the sentence was passed, she remains incarcerated. When a friend turns into a ruthless criminal, you've probably heard the saying, "With friends like these, who needs enemies?" This is often said about those who only pretend to be good friends, but are ready to betray, set up, deceive, and even commit a crime against you at any moment. Such vile actions often hide some selfish motive, but their consequences can be utterly unpredictable, and the bitter disappointment in a close person who betrayed your trust is usually the least of the evils. The case of Sarah Stern shocked even veteran police officers with the cynicism and cold-bloodedness with which her closest friend, whom she had known since childhood and trusted implicitly, dealt with the unfortunate young woman. It was this friend with whom the student shared her future plans and a significant secret that no one else knew. By doing so, Sarah essentially signed her own death warrant, as from that moment until the tragic end, the young man lived with plans on how to make her disappear forever, while remaining above suspicion. Surprisingly, this crime could have been prevented if those around had taken the perpetrator's words and actions more seriously. The criminal even laid out his plan on paper, presenting it as a script for a horror movie. But let's dissect this complex story from the beginning to understand what drove such a good friend. Who was Sarah Stern? Sarah Elizabeth Stern was born on March 24, 1997, in the small town of Neptune City in Monmouth County, New Jersey. She was the only and dearly beloved child in the simple family of Michael and Susan Stern. Due to health issues, Mrs. Stern couldn't have more children, so the parents poured all their love into their long-awaited daughter. Sarah grew up as an active, cheerful, and very sociable child. She performed on the school theater stage, was passionate about photography, drew well, and was involved in sports, competing for the local swimming team and playing softball. She dreamed of becoming an artist or designer and was preparing to apply to a local specialized college when a terrible tragedy struck her family. In the autumn of 2013, when 16-year-old Sarah had just graduated from high school and started college in the field of art she had dreamed of, her mother passed away. The woman had fought a long battle with cancer, and it seemed several times that the disease had receded, but the insidious illness returned with new force and ultimately won. This loss was a huge shock for the entire family, especially for the young girl who was always very close to her mother. For a while, Stern fell into depression, but she tried to support her father with whom she lived and who also had a hard time. They also lived with a dog named Buddy, whom the girl adored. Gradually, life began to improve. Sarah made plans for the future, and after graduating from college, she wanted to apply to a prestigious national university in New York. But before that, she dreamed of traveling the world, particularly planning to visit Canada and perhaps even live there for some time. The abandoned car. Michael Stern often had to travel out of state for work, sometimes for weeks at a stretch. But he never worried about leaving his daughter home alone because she was a grown, independent young woman and their town was considered quiet and safe. However, in December 2016, when he flew out for another business trip, trouble came knocking at his door. On the night of December 3rd, 2016, around 2:30 a.m., a call came into the police station from a concerned man reporting a car abandoned in the middle of the Belmar Bridge along Highway 35. The area was quite deserted, rarely traversed by anyone at night, making the solitary, empty vehicle immediately suspicious. The caller was a taxi driver, taking a shortcut home over the old bridge on the outskirts. He noticed the car parked by the side and stopped to see if anyone needed help. Finding the cabin empty and no one around, he called the police, suspecting the driver might have come here to end their life by jumping into the water below, a sadly not uncommon occurrence at this spot. Responding officers noted the keys left in the ignition. There were no signs of blood in the car, nor any signs of a struggle, leading to the initial theory that someone came to the bridge with the intention of voluntarily leaving this world by jumping into the river below. The next step was to find out who owned the abandoned old silver sedan. A database check revealed the car belonged to one Lily Stern, a senior American citizen who recently celebrated her 85th birthday. She lived in the same town, about 10 kilometers from where her car was found. Officers promptly visited Miss Stern's home to understand how and why the elderly woman's car ended up on the bridge at night. Lily was found at home, alive, well, and surprised by the police visit. She explained that due to poor eyesight, she hadn't driven for years. Instead, her 19-year-old granddaughter Sarah was the one who drove the car. Concerned, Lily immediately tried to call Sarah, but her phone was turned off. She then gave the officers her son's address, where he lived with Sarah, noting that only Sarah should be home since her father was away on a work trip and wouldn't be back until the next week. The mysteriously disappeared student. Sarah was not at home, and the back door to the house was found open, a worrying sign. An initial sweep by the police inside revealed nothing suspicious except for a dog whining locked in one of the bedrooms. There was no indication of any crime taking place. Belongings were in order, and there were no signs of struggle, bloodstains, or any evidence of an intruder's presence. By then, news of the situation had reached Michael Stern, and he was on his way home on the first available flight. The homeowner confirmed everything was in its place, and nothing was missing. Moreover, He stated that all of Sarah's personal belongings were also at home, including her passport, driver's license, and even her mobile phone, which she never parted with. The police shared their initial thoughts with Michael, suggesting his daughter might have gone to the bridge with the intention of jumping, and asked if he had noticed any signs of suicidal tendencies or self-harm attempts. Michael admitted that after his wife's passing, Sarah had gone through a period of depression, but with the support of family, friends, and her studies, she managed to recover. Furthermore, she had big plans for the future, dreaming of becoming a designer, wanting to travel and see the world. Nonetheless, on the night of December 3rd, the student vanished from her own home, and a few hours later, her car was found abandoned on the bridge. These were the established facts. Sarah was officially missing, and the investigation had to figure out who she was in contact with that day, what conversations she had, and who saw her last. Testimonies from the first witnesses. It soon came to light that on December 2nd, Sarah Stern had spent nearly the entire day with her best friend Liam Nakatazny, whom she had known since childhood. Liam turned out to be the last person who saw her, potentially shedding light on this mysterious case. Thus, law enforcement quickly decided to speak with him to gather details and try to reconstruct the events of that day. Upon arriving at the Nakatazny residence, police were met by Liam's mother, who informed them that her son was sleeping off a night shift. At the officer's request, she woke him up. Seemingly confused about the situation, Liam was surprised to learn about Sarah's disappearance. He confirmed that they had spent most of the previous day together and agreed to go to the police station to provide his statement. Liam shared that they had gone to college together in the morning, but decided to skip the last 2 lectures since it was Friday, and they wanted to relax. After class, they went back to her place, played video games, chatted, and shared their future plans. They left the house twice that day, once to grab food from a nearby fast food restaurant and another time to stop by a local supermarket. Around 7 in the evening, he left Sarah's house to head to his night shift at the 24-hour store and didn't see her after that. When asked if Sarah had been experiencing any psychological issues or other difficulties, Liam revealed quite a bit. He said that Sarah had been deeply depressed since her mother's passing, teetering between wanting to end it all or run away and start anew. He also mentioned that Sarah had had issues communicating with her father, struggling to find common ground. Liam didn't dismiss the possibility that Sarah might have taken her own life, but noted that shortly before disappearing, she had seriously considered moving to Canada and had even exchanged some money. His claim was confirmed by finding Canadian dollars in a bedside table drawer in Sarah's room, though the amount was so small it wouldn't have covered much. Another close friend and former classmate at Stearns, Preston Taylor, who had been her date to the high school prom and kept in touch after graduation, also gave a statement. He corroborated Liam's account, adding that Sarah was depressed and speculated that she either ran away to Canada or jumped off the bridge. By the end of the conversation, he was in tears, expressing how much Sarah meant to him, search for the body, questioning other witnesses. The theory of Sarah fleeing to Canada, or anywhere for that matter, was almost immediately dismissed since she couldn't have left the country without her passport. Law enforcement then focused on the grimmer theory and organized a massive search effort in the river. The search was complicated by the strong current in that area, which could quickly carry a body miles away from the bridge. Divers were deployed, special equipment was used, and police, along with hundreds of volunteers, scoured both banks of the river, looking for remains or any of Sarah's belongings. Among the volunteers actively participating in the search were also Liam and Preston. Unfortunately, despite all efforts, no trace of Sarah was found. Therefore, law enforcement decided to continue questioning people who knew her and were close to her. That's when a peculiar discrepancy emerged. According to friends and classmates, Sarah was not depressed. She was in great spirits, and none had heard about any problems with her father. On the contrary, she always spoke of him warmly and lovingly. However, After Sarah's disappearance, Liam and Preston behaved as if they had lost a close relative, garnering sympathy from many. But soon, people started to notice that their behavior was odd, as if they were performing for an audience. The two had become very close, but this development occurred about a month before the incident. Therefore, the police decided to take a closer look at the friends and re-interview them, the adopted brother of a wealthy heiress. When Liam was brought back to the station for further questioning, he appeared deeply distressed. The investigator inquired once more about his relationship with Sarah and Preston. Liam shared that the three of them grew up on the same street, attended the same school, and were closely knit, sharing their deepest secrets and dreams. Preston even took Sarah to the prom, but there were no romantic feelings between them. Liam mentioned that he and Sarah were not just friends. He considered her his sister. They even listed each other as siblings on their social media profiles. Sarah had no secrets from him, and she had told him that her mother had left her a significant amount of cash, most of which was kept in the safety deposit box. Allegedly, Sarah didn't trust her father, who also claimed a right to the funds, so she stored the money in the bank, but planned to retrieve it soon to run away to Canada. When this story was relayed to Michael Stern, he was quite surprised and offered his version of events. According to him, his wife began saving money for their daughter's future, for education, a wedding, or a home, from the moment Sarah was born. The cash was kept at home, stored in a shoebox, with many bills being old and some quite worn, though no one thought much of it at the time. After his wife passed away, the father handed the box of money to Sarah, advising her to deposit the old and worn bills in the bank. Sarah followed his advice, depositing some of the money into her checking account for everyday expenses and renting a safety deposit box for the rest. She decided to use it to pay for university after finishing college and to travel the world. Michael sternly denied having any claim to the money for his own purposes. What is the best friend hiding? The revelation that the missing student had a large sum of money led investigators to consider the possibility that someone might have targeted her for financial gain. The investigation then decided to check her safety deposit box and bank transactions. It turned out that a few days before disappearing, Sarah had withdrawn a substantial amount from an ATM and had also visited the bank to take out some cash from her box. Another surprise awaited the detectives. Bank surveillance footage revealed that Sarah hadn't gone to the bank alone, but was accompanied by Liam, who obviously knew about Sarah's banking activities. They decided to question Liam again, specifically why he hadn't mentioned this bank visit, which occurred on December 1st. His hesitation was noticeable, but he explained that Sarah trusted no one but him and had asked him to accompany her to the bank because she was afraid to carry a large amount of cash back home. His explanation seemed logical, and his demeanor was natural. Moreover, it was discovered that a house across from the Stern residence had a security camera that captured the street and part of the neighbor's yard. Footage from this camera confirmed that Liam stayed at Sarah's house until 7 in the evening, then left for work and did not return, while the silver sedan left the garage around 11 at night. A plot straight out of a horror movie. About a month after the girl's disappearance, another acquaintance of hers named Anthony, who had been out of town for several weeks and was unaware of the events, walked into the police station with a bizarre and chilling story. It turned out Anthony had been in the same class with Sarah, Liam, and Preston, and after graduating, he dived deep into studying filmmaking, maintaining communication only with Liam, who also had an interest in cinema. Anthony recounted that about a month and a half before Sarah vanished, Liam visited him, and one evening they brainstormed ideas for a horror flick aimed at teenagers. Liam quickly came up with a story about a girl who secretly tells a friend about a large sum of money she possesses. The friend, after gaining her trust and learning all the details, strangles her and dumps her body in a turbulent river. Anthony liked the plot, and they even wrote a couple of pages of the script that evening. However, Anthony soon moved on to another project, forgot about the story, and then left town for a real film shoot where he was working as a camera assistant. Upon his return, Liam unexpectedly called him, inquiring if the police had visited him or summoned him for questioning. Surprised by such questions and learning of Sarah's disappearance and the circumstances surrounding it, Anthony decided to go to the police himself. A horrifying confession. After hearing the new witness's testimony, the authorities suggested Anthony draw Liam into an open conversation and try to elicit a confession from him. Anthony agreed, and a plan was devised. He would invite Liam to collaborate on a project that required renting professional camera equipment, which they ostensibly couldn't afford. Knowing the suspect's aspirations of being in a movie, it was likely he wouldn't miss such an opportunity and might offer the money he took from Sarah. Liam took the bait almost immediately, but suggested they meet in person to discuss the details. A hidden camera was installed in Anthony's car, and he was instructed to carefully coax a confession out of his friend. When the two met, and Liam got into Anthony's car, he looked around cautiously, as if afraid there might be someone else inside. He then handed over an envelope containing $2,000 in old bills, asking if it was enough to rent the filming equipment. Anthony nodded affirmatively, and then inquired where Liam got so much old currency. Liam hesitated, then admitted the money was Sarah's, which he and Preston had taken from her house because the dead don't need it. He didn't go into further details, but his admission was enough for the police to arrest him and Taylor on suspicion of crime. The accomplice's tale. Preston quickly started cooperating with the authorities, striking a deal with the prosecution. He claimed he did not participate in the act itself, but helped his friend cover up the evidence and dispose of the body. According to Preston, Liam began devising plans to take Sarah's money as soon as he learned of its existence. It turned out that Sarah had kept her inheritance a secret even from her best friend for a long time. But when she seriously started planning her trip to Canada, Liam inquired how she intended to fund it, prompting Sarah to reveal the money left by her mother. Liam convinced her that such a sum was safer in a home safe than a bank vault and insisted she withdraw the cash. He even borrowed a significant amount from her right before the tragedy, the same money she had withdrawn from the ATM. When Sarah's father was out of town on a business trip, Liam decided it was time to put his plan into action. He roped in Preston by promising him $25,000. McCrime decided to handle the dirty work himself, requiring his friend only to help him erase any traces. He convinced Sarah to withdraw the money, failing to check how much she took out. They spent the next day together, with Liam waiting for the right moment. He locked Sarah's dog in another room to prevent it from defending its owner. Approaching her from behind, he began to strangle her. However, the crime proved more challenging than expected. Firstly, the athletic and strong Sarah resisted fiercely, leading to a struggle until she lost consciousness. Secondly, just when he thought she had passed, she would show signs of life. It took the perpetrator about half an hour to be sure Sarah Stern was no longer breathing. Afterward, Liam left her house, heading to work, leaving Preston to step in. He snuck into Sarah's house through the back door, out of the camera's view, dragged the body to the garage, and tidied up the room. A couple of hours later, Liam returned, took a small safe from Sarah's room, placed the body in the car, and drove off in such a way as to avoid being captured by the neighbor's camera. He headed to the bridge where Preston awaited in his own vehicle. Together, they disposed of the body in the river, wiped down the steering wheel, and drove away in Preston's car back to Liam's house to split the loot. They faced a huge disappointment as they found only $10,000 in the safe, not the $100,000 McCrime had anticipated. However, they decided not to spend the old bills immediately to avoid suspicion. The accomplices buried the safe in a local park, spending only the money Sarah had withdrawn from her account. Trial and verdict. Despite Preston's confession, Liam McCrime steadfastly denied any wrongdoing, attempting to shift the blame onto his friend. McCrime's lawyer also insisted on his client's innocence, suggesting Taylor acted alone. Moreover, as the body was never found and the circumstances of the disappearance remained unclear, there was a lingering possibility that Sarah was still alive, having vanished without her documents, money, belongings, or phone. A search of Liam's house turned up nothing except a small key fitting the buried safe, identified by Preston. The trial lasted over 2 years, but despite the absence of a body and McCrimi's confessions, his guilt was established through the combination of evidence. The script described months before the incident, the key to the safe found in his home, his words captured in Anthony's car, and the old bills he handed over. Additionally, fingerprints of both Preston and Leon were found inside the safe, and a colleague testified that McCrime was absent from work for a few hours that night, asking to be covered. Liam McCrime was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. His accomplice, who did not directly participate in the act, received an 18-year sentence for obstruction of justice and hindering the investigation. Preston Taylor is eligible for parole no sooner than 15 years into his sentence. The body of college student Sarah Stern remains undiscovered to this day. Beautiful, rich, famous, and successful women are sometimes very unhappy in their personal lives. Just think of the story of the Turkish arabesque performer Belgin Sarılmışır, known under the pseudonym Bergen. The most famous woman in Turkey, famous all over the world, was tortured by her husband for many years. He beat her, disfigured her face with acid, and finally shot her. Our heroine today is Ecuadorian performer, television actress, music producer, and lingerie designer Edith Rosario Barmeo Cisneros, better known as Sharon Lera, or simply Sharon. With her own hard work, perseverance, and talent, she has reached heights that one could only dream of, becoming one of the top stars of Ecuador and Latin America in general. Sharon dreamed of simple female happiness, family comfort, and a quiet harbor where she could return every evening and just be herself. But the man she loved, her husband and the father of her child, saw in her only an inexhaustible source of finances for his trouble-free and carefree life. It was this man who eventually became the culprit of the death of the nation's favorite in 2015. But despite the wide publicity, the final point in this high-profile case has not been put to this day. Sharon Lera, biography, early years. The future star was born in 1974, March 28th, in the large metropolis of Santiago de Guayaquil, located on the Guayas River in the province of Ecuador. The full name given to the girl at birth sounds like Edith Rosario Barmeo Cisneros. She grew up in a simple and rather modest family, where in addition to her, there were 2 other children. Soon after the birth of her daughter, the whole family moved to the city of Duran, where the future queen of Technocumbia spent her childhood and youth. Edith, from an early age, was a bright, active, and very artistic girl. At home, she was affectionately called Charo, or Charito, and it was this nickname later became part of her stage name. As a child, Edith was a big fan of the popular American comedy television series Bewitched, another name, My Wife Bewitched Me. Her idol and object of imitation was the main star of this show, the cult actress Elizabeth Montgomery. Then, the same girl began to call herself Charo Enchantress and dreamed of repeating the success of her favorite actress. From an early age, she became interested in music and loved to sing. She had a good musical ear and not bad vocal data, but to call them outstanding was difficult. Nevertheless, the girl conquered everyone with her natural charisma, artistry, and the ability to reincarnate. At the age of 8, she managed to win at the City Children's Festival, performing compositions Fox in Kaiko, as well as Los Angeles. By the time she graduated from school, she had already won several awards at city and regional music competitions. She dreamed of becoming a famous singer and conquer the big stage, but her parents were skeptical of these dreams. They believed that the heiress is not talented enough to become a star, and since their family has no connections in show business, the career of a performer is not worth dreaming about. Edith, listening to the advice of her family, decided to go to university, choosing a more practical and down-to-earth profession as a public relations specialist at the State University of Guayaquil at the Faculty of Communication Sciences. But her dream of becoming a singer did not go anywhere. Edith believed that everything has its time, and she should wait a little to choose the most appropriate moment. Path to fame. While studying at university, Edith took on any part-time job and tried herself as an assistant teacher in a kindergarten, a seller of sweets and Morocco, a traditional Ecuadorian drink, as well as a dancer in the local creative team, performing at the warm-up of visiting popular artists and musical groups. But all this was only to save money, which she later used to record her debut music album, Braveheart, which was released in 1998. In 2005, the singer released her third studio album and received the prestigious award as the first solo techno-cumbia artist in the country to top the music charts. In 2010, she released her fourth album entitled Poco a Poco, and 2 years later, her fifth album was released, which unfortunately became the last one in her life and career. From the early 2000s until her tragic death in 2015, Sharon was the author, host, and co-host of many entertainment programs and TV shows on TV channels in Ecuador and other Latin American countries. She has been active in television series and has also worked as a public relations specialist for Canalo TV. In addition to a successful career on the music scene and television, Edith also decided to try herself as a fashion designer, creating seductive lingerie by her own sketches. And in this case, she also waited for success, and the brand she created quickly gained popularity among women almost all over America. For whatever business did not take Sharon, she everywhere succeeded, achieving great heights and recognition. Personal life of the performer. Despite the dizzying success on stage, television, and fashion business, the personal life of one of the main stars of Ecuador was not so rosy. She did not like to touch on this topic in conversations with the press, and in every way avoided such questions from journalists. However, Sharon Lera was constantly in the crosshairs of numerous photo and video cameras, so to hide anything from prying eyes was simply impossible. It is known that in the mid-90s, the aspiring performer was romantically involved with an entrepreneur and music producer named Eduardo Gray. For several years, the couple was officially engaged, but the wedding never came to the wedding, although Edith gave birth to a daughter from her lover. She named her heiress Samantha. The daughter inherited the entrepreneurial vein and artistry of her mother, also becoming quite a famous performer and actress. But to surpass her mother, she failed, despite all the efforts and available connections. Soon after parting with Eduardo, Sharon spun a new romance. This time her chosen one was a little-known television operator, with whom she met while working on one of the telenovelas. Their relationship developed rapidly, and after a short engagement, the couple planned a modest wedding, trying to hide this event from others. But the news quickly became public, and the marriage itself lasted a short time. About the reasons for the sudden divorce of the performer preferred to keep silent. Later on, the artist had romantic relationships with a famous impresario named Pedro Francisco, then with a young dancer from the show ballet who performed with her on stage, as well as with some of her star colleagues. Unfortunately, none of these romances did not have a serious continuation, and Sharon broke up with her boyfriends for various reasons. The performer herself did not want to comment on the events that took place in her personal life. She raised a daughter, engaged in career, but still hoped that one day in her life there will be a worthy, loving man. Relationship with Giovanni Lopez. In 2009, the performer met a young man named Giovanni Lopez, who was more than 10 years younger than her. He was also a native of Ecuador, but as a child, together with his parents, emigrated to the United States. The family settled in New York City, where virtually all of Giovanni's childhood and adolescence took place. They first met during a large tour of the singer in the United States, but at that time their communication was limited to work, and Lopez himself helped with the organization of Sharon's performance. But probably, even then, these two have already penetrated some sympathy for each other. In addition, it turned out that the young man was a longtime fan of the Queen of Technocumbia, and he was honored to have the opportunity to work with her personally. A year later, Giovanni decided to return to his native Ecuador. He brought with him the designs he had developed for artists, one of which he created specifically for Sharon. So began their collaboration, and almost immediately a stormy romance broke out between them. At the time of the beginning of this relationship, the performer was already 36 years old, and Giovanni was barely 24 years old. However, the 12-year age difference did not embarrass them at all. and the couple did not care what people around them would think about it and how they will write about them in the press. Almost immediately, the lovers moved in together, deciding to live together. However, it should be noted that the parents and daughter of the performer treated her new chosen one very cautiously. Giovanni immediately they did not like it, and they decided that the young man twisted romance with the star solely for his own selfish purposes, and in fact did not love her at all, but only wanted to use. Sharon listened to the warnings of loved ones did not, because she believed that met the main man in his life, with whom they would live many happy years. Soon the couple married, and the couple began to think about the birth of a common heir. However, here they faced a problem, because the performer could not get pregnant. As a result, she decided to in vitro fertilization, and in May 2012, 38-year-old celebrity gave birth to a boy who was named Brian Giovanni Lopez, the abusive relationship. Giovanni only at first tried to be a caring and loving man on whom you can rely in everything. However, as soon as the couple concluded marriage and the performer became pregnant, the behavior of the young husband began to change rapidly, and he himself literally turned into a domestic tyrant. He no longer sought to earn money independently, and he was quite satisfied with the position of an Alphonse. He willingly spent his wife's money for his own needs, entertainment, expensive clothes, and care for his appearance. In addition, Lopez began to abuse alcoholic beverages and less often appeared at home, preferring to spend time with friends and mistresses. To all this, Giovanni began to openly insult his wife, pointing to her age and fading beauty. According to some reports, because of his offensive statements and remarks, Sharon decided to do a number of plastic surgeries to preserve her youth and look like her husband. In particular, the performer enlarged her breasts, did a lift, and several cosmetic manipulations, but all her efforts were in vain and did not help to return to the family peace and harmony. Queen of Technocumbia continued to work actively, starred in TV series, posted entertainment shows, as well as preparing material for the recording of a new album. She tried to smile in public and claimed that she was finally happy in her personal life. However, only people close to her knew about how things were really going in her family. In early 2014, when little Brian was not yet 2 years old, the artist made the first serious attempt to break off the relationship with Giovanni. But he said that he would agree to give a divorce only if Sharon will give him half of his property and funds in her bank accounts, so that he, after the separation, could continue to lead an idle and carefree lifestyle to which he was used to. Sharon could not agree to these conditions, and so began to consult with lawyers how to dissolve the marriage, but at the same time, to keep the property and get full custody of their joint young son. By the end of the year, family life became simply unbearable, but the couple continued in public to play the role of happy spouses. One last family trip. On the eve of the new year 2015, the performer gave a number of festive concerts and also starred together with her star colleagues in several dedicated Christmas and New Year's events. After that, exhausted by work, the young woman decided to arrange a small vacation and go with friends, husband, and son to the warm coast to relax a little, try to gather her thoughts, and decide what to do next. On the evening of January 3rd, 2015, the whole company decided to make the return trip. Since the journey was going to be long and they were traveling by car, the friends decided to follow each other and be in constant contact in case someone needed help. They decided to coordinate all the stops on the way in advance. Sharon had to drive the car that evening because her husband had been drinking alcoholic beverages all day. After a few hours, the company made a stop at a gas station and decided to have dinner there in a roadside cafe. During the meal, the singer and her young husband had a big fight because Giovanni again ordered a drink, although earlier he promised that he would not drink and get behind the wheel, giving Sharon the opportunity to rest and give time to the child. The couple argued for about half an hour and could not agree on who would drive the car. In the end, their friends could not stand it and asked if they could continue on their way. The singer said that she did not want to delay them because of her family problems, so they could go on, and he and Giovanni would have to stay a little longer. The friends reluctantly agreed, and after another half hour headed to their car, leaving the couple at a roadside cafe. They had no idea that they would never see Sharon alive again. Strange accident. On January 4th, around 2:30 in the morning, the friends received a phone call from an agitated Giovanni asking them to come back because there had been an accident and Sharon might be dead. His words were a real shock because he did not specify details and it was completely unclear what had happened on the night road. By the time they returned, emergency services were already on the scene, trying to help the victim and reconstruct the picture of events. According to Giovanni, on the highway Ruta del Spondylus, near the Ecuadorian province of Santa Elena, at about 1:15 a.m., his wife got out of the car to calm her crying son and change his diaper. At that moment, another car crashed into her at a great speed. This car, without even stopping, sped away, leaving the scene of the accident. The young woman was thrown a few dozen meters to the side of the road from the impact. When the ambulance arrived, she was still alive. She was even taken to the hospital, but despite the best efforts of the doctors, Sharon soon died of massive injuries and internal bleeding. Giovanni was still drunk and confused in his testimony, and his story sounded rather strange and not quite logical. The police therefore decided to detain him until morning to question him in detail when he had sobered up. Lopez confirmed the words of friends that he and his wife quarreled all evening and admitted that, contrary to the promises and prohibitions of his wife, defiantly drank alcohol in order not to drive and piss off Sharon. Giovanni's testimony. He did not see the license plate number of the car that hit his wife. He did not even remember the make, and only said that the car was white. There were no CCTV cameras on that stretch of road. No witnesses could be found, and the accident itself looked suspicious because Sharon did not even turn to the side of the road before leaving the cabin and did not make sure of safety. Although on a straight deserted road, any vehicle can be seen and heard from afar, even at night. The longer the police tried to correlate all the facts with Lopez's story, the more what had happened resembled not an accident, but a premeditated murder. Giovanni was confused about the timing and chronology of events, could not remember details, but most interestingly, he could not explain why their car was turned in the opposite direction to the route they were traveling. After another interrogation, the husband of the dead singer was arrested as the main suspect in the case of her death. The autopsy results and Sharon's funeral. The autopsy revealed that the deceased woman's body had numerous injuries typical of a victim of a traffic accident. However, experts also found a clear and fairly deep mark on Sharon's chest that could have been left by a seatbelt. This fact raised even more questions and suspicions. Samantha, who spent New Year's holidays in the company of her boyfriend, learned about the tragedy from singer Sonia Ramos, a close friend and colleague of her mother. The girl could not believe that all this is really happening. She called her father, Eduardo Gray, and asked him to come to her as soon as possible so that they went to Sharon's home together and began preparations for the funeral. After making all the preliminary arrangements, the body of the celebrity was taken to the Coliseum Cerrado Voltaire Paladines Polo in the province of Guayaquil. To say goodbye to one of the brightest stars of Ecuador came thousands of her friends, colleagues, and fans. Also, this sad event was covered in all leading publications of the country, and on television was even announced a one-day mourning. Grief-stricken Samantha sobbed on the shoulder of her father, and near were her grandmother, grandfather, and uncle and aunt. All members of the deceased celebrity's family refused to comment in any way on what had happened. None of them accused Giovanni of what happened directly, but all of them showed their negative attitude towards him. An investigation and a surprise court decision. The case was one of the most high-profile in Ecuador's history. It was widely covered in the press and jeopardized the reputation of the country's judicial system. The initial verdict literally shocked relatives and fans of the celebrity, and the revision of the case was delayed so much that the final point in this matter has not been put to this day. So, the white car, which presumably hit the artist, was found a few days later. The car had characteristic damage which, as experts have established, could be obtained as a result of an accident if you hit a person at high speed. The owner of the vehicle was a young woman named Haltiana Chavez, who categorically denied her involvement in the accident. However, the prosecutor's office opened 2 criminal cases at once, negligent homicide against Tatiana, and premeditated murder against Giovanni. Lopez's story sounded extremely unconvincing. He was confused and contradicted himself, then recognized the car and even claimed to have seen the driver, then again doubted his own words, referring to alcohol intoxication. In parallel, the daughter and parents of the deceased also filed a statement, blaming the singer's husband for the incident. In their opinion, he never loved Sharon and had a motive for the murder in order to seize her money and get custody of the child. Samantha noted that her mother, shortly before the tragedy, consulted with lawyers about the dissolution of the marriage. Samantha also added that her little brother, who was the only witness to the incident, cries all the time and repeats, "Daddy is bad." However, they did not involve the child as a witness in order not to cause the boy even more psychological trauma. After a detailed reconstruction of the events of that evening, Tatiana was ruled out as a suspect. By comparing the times and places where Tatiana had been seen before and after the accident, it was determined that she could not have been physically near the accident site at that time, and her car had been damaged in another accident. The other car was soon found to be the one that was found to have hit Sharon. The owner, Luis Correo, who had been driving that night, was arrested. By that time, he had already managed to replace the broken headlight and repair other body damage. But experts were able to establish that at the scene of the accident were found shards of glass from his car. Luis himself admitted to everything and said that Sharon literally fell under the wheels of his car, and he was so scared of what happened that he just drove away. In June 2015, Giovanni was found guilty of manslaughter of his wife. Experts proved that the injury on the woman's chest from the seat belt was caused by her trying to protect herself before her husband pushed her out of the car, right under the wheels of another car. However, the court verdict shocked Sharon's relatives and fans because her killer was only given 3 years. A retrial and attempts to appeal the new verdict. Such a lenient sentence caused a storm of excitement in the media and provoked a lot of protests across the country. People demanded fair punishment for the murderer of the star and national favorite. Already in July of the same year, the judges involved in the case were suspended and subsequently dismissed. The new judicial staff canceled the previous verdict, arguing that a number of administrative and bureaucratic mistakes had been made. All attempts by the defense lawyers to challenge the reversal of the verdict were unsuccessful. Luis Correo was cleared of responsibility for the singer's death, but he was still charged with fleeing the scene and attempting to conceal evidence. But Giovanni Lopez was brought to every court session under heavy security in order to avoid attacks on him fans of Sharon. In October 2015, the husband of the singer was found guilty of her death and sentenced to 26 years in prison. The court also took into account the evidence provided by Samantha evidence of Giovanni's cruel treatment of her mother, as well as the fact that he blackmailed his wife, demanding from her a fabulous sum for consent to divorce. A few months later, 2 appeals were filed at once. The prosecution demanded to increase the term to the maximum, 35 years, and the lawyers insisted on the illegality of the new sentence. However, both complaints were rejected. In 2021, Lopez again tried to challenge the court's decision. In addition, he stated that he was subjected to ill treatment in prison and his rights were grossly violated. The prisoner even went on a hunger strike to pressure the court to release him. He argued that he was wrongfully convicted and the main perpetrator of the tragedy, Luis Correo, remained free. In 2023, Giovanni, already with a new lawyer, appealed again, once again hoping to secure his release. It is worth noting that in this difficult case, the composition of the judges was again changed due to the revealed abuse of power. Therefore, Lopez's defense hopes not only to challenge the verdict, but also to seek compensation for the years spent in prison.